Does it work?
Yep, just like a vending machine.
No, I just wanted you to pay for my water. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening.
That's the zoning gallery.
Yep. So
The zoning gallery. Yeah.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out this evening to Douglas Recreation Center. Today is day 29 of Columbus City Council's 60-day public comment period regarding the zoning initiative that will run through June 10th. So we're about halfway through that public comment period at this point to share feedback with both City Council and the administration as we consider the zoning initiative. We'll also be holding 2 additional public hearings in the coming weeks, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. Before we begin, I certainly want to thank everyone. We've have a robust attendance here this evening, which I appreciate everyone taking the time to come out tonight, and certainly want to thank our staff here at the Recreation Center for hosting us. To the zoning team, thank you for representing your respective departments. This evening we have Assistant Director for Growth Policy for the Department of Development, Kevin Wheeler. Planning Administrator from the Department of Development, Mark Dravilis, Deputy Director of Housing Strategies, Aaron Prosser, and Planning Manager for the Department of Building Zoning Services, Christine Palmer. Thank you all for being here tonight for this first of 3 public hearings being hosted by Columbus City Council. Also want to thank my colleagues here that are here with me tonight. Council President Shannon Hardin, who's been an incredible partner as this initiative has made its way to our legislative body. Councilmember Day Acauer for being here as well. And I believe Councilmember Manuel Remy will be joining us here for this hearing as well. This hearing is also being streamed on CTV, so not only do we have robust turnout here at Douglas Recreation Center, but I'm hoping that this will have the opportunity for more folks to join virtually as well. The purpose of this hearing is to hear an overview of what has been proposed by the mayor's administration regarding the zoning initiative and hear public feedback regarding that proposal. As I mentioned, this hearing is being streamed live on CTV as well as on City Council's Facebook and YouTube pages. This hearing will also be archived on our YouTube page for folks to be able to view afterwards as well. It's no secret in Columbus that our city is growing. Whether it's the cranes that are dotting our skyline or another national report that identifies our city as one of the fastest growing in the country, this growth is real. And we as a community must make intentional choices about how we're going to deal with that growth. If we do nothing, our housing crisis in this community will only get worse. This is a simple supply and demand equation. We have more demand for housing than we have supply, which means that all housing becomes more expensive. This problem will only be exacerbated as we welcome an additional 3 million new neighbors in the next 25 years, according to the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. We need to build 200,000 new homes in Central Ohio over the next 10 years just to keep pace with our growth. That's about 55 new housing units per day. Let me repeat that. Central Ohio needs to see an additional 55 new housing units built per day over the next 10 years just to keep pace with our growth as it stands today. If we as a community truly believe that housing is a human right and our neighbors deserve an affordable roof over their heads, we must do things differently. That is why, as chair of this Columbus City Council Zoning Committee, I've worked with the administration, stakeholders across our city to bring forward the zoning initiative. Our plan to modernize our zoning code, which has not happened in over 70 years. Think about that, 70 years since we have comprehensively addressed our zoning code. To me, this is about ensuring that we have predictable patterns of development, promoting transit-oriented development, encouraging walkable neighborhoods, and create a code that has real design standards baked into it on the front end, rather than relying on project-by-project negotiations that sometimes lead to inequitable outcomes across our city. If we do this right, we can ensure that longtime residents can continue to afford to stay in their neighborhoods, and new residents can find housing options that meet their needs, and our kids, my kids, can afford to live in a city where they grew up. And that's ultimately why we're here. We know that our code, as it currently stands, does not promote the things that we know this community needs to move itself forward, which is why this is the moment that we're taking up this reform, again, to make sure that we as a community have the opportunity to weigh in on the front end, to be proactive rather than reactive. Our current code as it stands ensures that we are reactive in the development process all across the city, which is why I'm so glad there are so many folks here with us tonight, and hopefully many more watching virtually, because now is the time for folks to engage so that we have the opportunity to create a code and a map that actually bakes that feedback in on the front end to allow us, again, to be proactive as our city continues to change into the future. So with that, I would like to pause and allow one of my friends and our leader of Columbus City Council, Council President Hardin, who again has been one of the principal voices that has led us here to talk about why we need to address our zoning code. Council President?
Well, thank you, Chair Dorans, for having this hearing, and thank you to our residents for being here. Council prides itself on being aggressive listeners. And yes, this is a big deal. There's a reason why cities, and not just our city, have not updated our zoning code in 70 years. Because it's hard. It's hard to have conversations about land use and about who we are and about who we want to be. But it's critically important. So thank you for being here. Thank you to my colleague. Thank you to the departments for your leadership and for getting us here today. As President Pro Tem Dorans said, every Monday night at Council, we consider a large number of rezoning ordinances and variances, close to 150 last year alone, that helped pave the way for more than 10,000 housing units to be built. The fact that we have to do that every single Monday illustrates that the current code does not work for the 14th largest city in the country. Every single variance or rezoning is a story of builders and homeowners who have to spend months or years navigating red tape and lawyers' fees just to build the projects that community members and neighborhoods agree to work for their community, just for those costs to get passed on to our future tenants. And this is happening when generally everyone agrees that the variance or rezoning makes sense because of how old our code is and how restrictive it is. So we need to make change because we are growing and we have a zoning code that keeps us rooted in the past. So those questions are not up for debate, but what is up for debate is what those changes look like and if we have the will to move forward and do what we have to do to prepare our community. We can make sure that our new neighbors, the million folks that Councilmember Dorans talked about, have a place to put down roots, and that longtime residents don't get priced out of our neighborhoods as they move in. We can have enough density of a customer base that we can create the grocery stores that we all want, the child care centers close to our homes, and the restaurants in our neighborhoods that make our communities desirable. Or if we don't, if we are afraid of change or short-sighted or complacent, then Columbus will go the way of cities like Austin or Denver, which have become uninhabitable for working class people, for the people who grew up in those towns, where the teachers and the firefighters and the police officers have to live 55 minutes outside of the city because they literally cannot afford to live in the city. So what we know for sure is that what we are doing is not working. The big question is, will we have the will to do the hard things, to have the conversations, to figure this out as a community? I believe we will. I believe that we do have the will. And I'm so grateful for you being here this evening to be part of this conversation. Councilmember Dorans said that we are in the middle of a listening period. Council, again, will be aggressively listening. Council has set up a zone-in, well, not council, but the city has set up a zone-in gallery. So this is an opportunity to hear from you today, but there are many opportunities to engage. We will continue listening throughout this process, but then we will take a vote. And I believe that at the end of the day, this will be something that will definitely move our community forward and make sure that this is a great place for all of us to live, work, and play. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Council President. A couple of housekeeping notes before we move on with the public hearing. One, we have a number of folks have already signed to speak on a public speaker slip. This evening, we're going to ask folks, we've had at least, I think, close to 20 folks that have signed up to speak tonight. So we are going to ask folks to try and limit their comments as much as possible to 3 minutes. I always like to joke, we'll use some good Midwestern politeness. So if I need to jab you a little bit to sort of wrap up, I will, but we'll try and be respectful of folks as much as we can here tonight. There is a microphone in the back. If can I have one of the staff members go over to it to show folks where it's at? So you're following Cameron right there. So when I call your public speaker slip, that is where you're going to need to come to speak into the microphone. Again, we'll try and limit comments to about 3 minutes. The other thing, as the Council President mentioned, this is incredibly important for Council to listen. So I'm very impressed that we have the amount of folks that are out tonight, the folks that have signed up to speak. Normally, we have folks sign up to speak beforehand, but this topic is so incredibly important in the future of Columbus. We are not going to cut folks off. So if you're listening to the presentation here tonight from one of the various departments, say, hey, I've got a question about this. Kevin, if you want to raise your hand in the back. That is Kevin McCain from our Legislative Research Office. He will be able to provide you with a speaker slip. I will try to issue a last call at one point, so we'll keep things moving. But the goal here is to make sure that if you have a question, if you have a comment, that Council hears that question or that comment. We may not have the answer for you tonight, but we're going to do our darndest to get it for you. As this legislation has been presented to Council, it's our ability to amend it if we so choose. However, we want to make sure our community truly understands what this proposal is and what this proposal isn't. And part of that community discussion is making sure that we have our ears open and we do not have any impediment to that kind of feedback. So thank you again for being here. At this point, I'd love to turn the meeting over to Assistant Director Kevin Wheeler to give us an overview of the zoning initiative. Assistant Director, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Dorans. I'm going to go through this presentation. I'll try to be efficient because I know folks want to share their comments with us, and we want to hear that. But we also recognize that for some of you, this may be the first time that you've had a chance to hear about the proposal. Others may know it really well, and it's hard to balance those two ends of the spectrum. But we want to make sure that folks have a chance to just sort of understand what we're talking about. So the goal of Zone In is to create a more effective, equitable, and sustainable framework for guiding land use, development, and growth. And really, cities rely on zoning and land use policy and tools like that to really accomplish this. But as you heard this evening from Council President Hardin, Councilmember Dorans, we have a zoning code that's pretty dysfunctional. It's not getting the job done. So why now? Again, you've heard some of the reasons already, but again, we have a code that hasn't been updated since the 50s. That's when Eisenhower was president, if you are a fan of presidential history. Columbus and Central Ohio are growing, and that brings both challenges and opportunities. And we recognize that the trend that we're on now, if you, like me, have kids in their 20s, they face a very different world than maybe we did when we were that age in terms of what their options are. And so we recognize that the things we're doing now aren't working. And as any city needs to, as anybody needs to, you have to be thinking about the future and how you prepare for that, guide that. So we're looking at new strategies, new tools, and some of you are familiar with Link Us, which is an initiative to provide improved transit. Some of you are aware that the city has a climate action plan to try to address the issues of sustainability. We have a housing strategy for the city itself, and then we're working with our regional partners. And then, of course, this evening we're here to talk about Zone In. The priorities for this project are to leverage our corridors to create more housing in more places. We want to support Main Street jobs and businesses. We want to promote a more equitable city. We want to expand the role of corridors in creating healthy, connected communities. We know that folks want to be able to walk, bike, use transit. A lot of times that's not something that we're able to do. And then we want to foster good urban design. We have a lot of development in our city that we can be proud of, and we want to continue that. Community engagement. This slide talks about what we've done before the public review draft stage. So we've had thousands of people engaged in a lot of different ways. We've had over 5,000 written comments. Again, this is prior to our current stage. We've done 100+ presentations to area commissions and local community groups. We've had 15 bigger community events, workshops, and conversations out in the community. We have an email distribution list of 2,600 people, 6,600 completed surveys. Some of you filled out our survey last fall about different kinds of buildings and height and trade-off issues. 31 zip codes represented in Central Ohio. We had some well outside of Columbus. 78,000 postcards were sent out, not just to property owners, but renters that are either along the corridor directly or within 125 feet. And then we've had a website that has had over 27,000 unique hits. We've also had our phone number and email. We've tried to be as accessible as we can be. I know that we've benefited from a lot of public news articles in all kinds of media as well, bringing people's attention to the work. So what are we doing right now? As you heard just a bit ago, we're in the midst of a public review period. That period lasts or runs through Monday, June 10th. The code and the web map are on our website. You can go to that and interact. We also have this gallery. It's downtown at 141 North Front Street. We chose to do this because we were able to keep this facility open 6 days a week. So we have evening hours, we have some Saturday hours. Rather than just coming to each community for an hour or two, we wanted to provide property owners, community groups, anybody an opportunity to come down, let us walk with you through this gallery, which sort of explains how this project came about, the work that we did along the way, and then ultimately, what is this recommendation about? So if you're somebody that just says, take me to the map, take me to the code, we will do that. If you want to see the bigger picture, we're going to do that as well. But that's open. You can schedule online, or you can call us if you're not a online kind of person. Free parking. That's also the case. We have a city garage next to the gallery, and you can park in the city garage for free. And you know, it's easier to get downtown on a bus than any place else, so that's also an option. So what is zoning? Ultimately, zoning regulates, as many of you know, such things as how do you use a property? How can you? Is it residential? Is it commercial? How big are the buildings? Where are they placed? How tall can they be? Things like that. And zoning consists of two parts. It's a code, it's a written code, and it's a map. And you look on the map and you determine what your zone is, and then you look at the code and you determine what the rules are. And again, I know that for some of you that's 101, but it's just important to have a level setting here. We're updating both the code and the map. That's our proposal. The existing code, this is getting even really more wonky for those folks who follow these things. The existing code is in Title 33 of the Columbus City Codes. We're creating a new title, Title 34. And over time, as we work through the code, we'll be moving more and more things to Title 34. But for a while, they're going to work together. So highlights of the proposal before you. It creates 6 new mixed-use districts. A lot of our plans, I'm sitting next to the planning administrator for the city, Mark Gervillis, and a lot of our plans call for mixed use along our key corridors. And that means that you have residential and office and commercial, just different kinds of land use. They could share the same building. That's kind of the historic model. They could be next to each other. But the point is that you have things that are in close proximity. And you can walk from one thing to another easily. We have plans that for decades have said, hey, it's really important to do that, but we don't have zoning districts which really enable us to do that. This code prioritizes housing. We'll talk about that as well. This code elevates people over cars. Right now we have a zoning code that does a great job of providing more parking than we need all over the city, regardless of how well served that place is with transit or how walkable it is. It's just one size fits all, which leads to a lot of wasted opportunity. This code removes barriers to using older buildings and growing businesses. It encourages smaller scale projects and emerging developers. I think one of the things that's important to recognize is that in a lot of our older corridors, you've got small parcels and it's hard to do anything with them. A lot of times they have constraints with the existing zoning, which makes it difficult to reuse them. And so this code is really aimed at figuring out how can you use even smaller parcels. And then finally, as we'll talk later, this proposal protects existing uses. If you're on the corridors today and your property's being rezoned and you're worried because you're afraid that you have an existing use that has to, well, you'll have to go away, there are protections for that. So I apologize in advance for this slide. I don't like to use slides like this, but I just want to talk very quickly through these districts. So you have 6 different mixed-use districts, and I'll go through them in order. The first district is called Urban General 1, and this allows for residential, office, retail, civic uses like schools and government offices, and then limited, or not limited, non-auto oriented commercial. So what this means is that you wouldn't be able to establish additional gas stations and car lots and things like that. The ones that are there today, legally established, they're protected, but we wouldn't be endorsing additional ones. This is going to be in the older city on stretches between key intersections. So we're close to Cleveland Avenue. So this is not at 11th in Cleveland or 17th in Cleveland. It's in the section in between. What's the height limit? 4 stories. Currently, it's 3 stories. This proposal will be 4 stories. We'll talk about a potential bonus for projects that include affordability, but that does not apply to this district. It's 4 stories. Urban General 2, there are some areas in the city where you have that, again, stretches between major centers or intersections, but they're primarily residential. They might have a bigger setback, maybe they have office. Urban General 2 recognizes that more limited array of land uses. It does allow for limited commercial, but again, it's 4 stories with no bonus for affordability commitments. Urban Center, so now I'm back on Cleveland Avenue, and you're at 11th in Cleveland. Some people call it Four Corners. You're at 17th, or you're at Hudson. And these are areas that either because it's a major intersection, not just for cars, but for the community, maybe it's a bus transit intersection. These are places where we believe more intensity is appropriate. You try to focus population in areas where you can take advantage of improved transit and existing infrastructure. And so in Urban Center, you can build a building that's 5 stories high. If you commit to affordability, you can go to 7 stories. Aaron Prosser's on the panel tonight, and we anticipate that some of you may have questions about that. We're going to be happy to talk about that or answer questions that council may have. But we also, at our next hearing on June 6th, are really going to focus especially on affordability and housing, as well as parking, because we know those are 2 things a lot of you have questions about. So 5 stories, 7 with a bonus or commitment to affordability. Then we talk about urban core. And urban core, this is in the Brewery District. This is East Franklinton. This is the Short North. This is High Street by campus. These are areas that either they're right next to downtown or they're a major activity center. Something big is happening in this location. And these are just areas where we believe intensity is most appropriate. And so you have a range of uses, just like Urban Center and Urban General. It doesn't endorse additional auto-oriented uses. Again, if you're there today, you're still okay. But it allows for buildings up to 12 stories in height, and bonus of 4 additional stories. And one of the things that we thought about with building height is that when you go up, you sort of change, there are different stages of construction type. And we sort of thought about, okay, at what point do you move away from one construction type to another? And so that's part of what we looked at. So those are the more urban districts. And I'll have a few map examples to share with you here in a bit. And then you have 2 more suburban areas or districts. Community Activity Center. This is a combination of all the uses that you're familiar with: retail, housing, civic, commercial, residential, office, etc. And these are in suburban areas. Like, think Morse Road, think Sawmill Road or Bethel Road, Hamilton Road south of 70, Broad Street west of Wilson, areas like that. And in those locations, 5 stories by right, these areas have bigger setbacks. There's more of a recognition that, cars are you have to accommodate cars. They're not going to go away. You need to make sure that you're factoring that in. But it says, hey, your cars, you shouldn't have a huge parking lot out in front. It should be behind the building, beside the building. And again, 2 additional stories available for a commitment to affordability. And then finally, regional activity center. And these are suburban areas. They're kind of like the urban core. These are, some of you might be familiar with Bridge Street in Upper Arlington, Dublin, where they have a focus of density. This isn't something that belongs everywhere, but maybe in key locations. So the continent, some of you remember the way the continent used to be. It hasn't been that way for a long time, right? Why would we not want to encourage redevelopment at the continent in a way that really takes advantage of the existing infrastructure? So in these areas, we have an allowance for up to 7 stories in height with 3 additional stories available for a commitment to affordability. Some other areas where you have this designation, former Eastland Mall site, the northeast quadrant of Cleveland and 161, the northeast quadrant of, actually I think it may be more of that intersection than just the northeast quadrant of Sawmill and 161. So areas where, again, it's not everywhere, but we're saying, hey, these areas really are appropriate for more development. District regulations, I talked about six different districts. Each one of them has pages within the code where you read through them. It tells you what the rules are, what the setbacks are, what the heights are, what the uses that are permitted are, et cetera. So this is just an example where we're trying to make the code more user-friendly. Right now, you're going all over the code. And even if you know a lot about the code, you may struggle with, okay, did I miss something over here that isn't connected? Objective design standards. I think one of the things that folks have said is, well, maybe the current system doesn't work so great, but we get a lot of great buildings because we're negotiating for things. I think we recognize that we want to ensure that our city continues to benefit from great architecture, great design, and we've built in some design standards in the code. These are not policies, these are requirements that would apply in all neighborhoods. And it's designed to give folks options. So if you build a building and it's really wide, you need to break up that horizontal plane or facade so you're not just looking at one big flat building. And you can do that in a variety of ways. We give you choices, but you need to do it. We also require you to choose one of, I think, 9 different frontage types. A frontage type is just a fancy way of saying that the building has to have a front door, it has to face the street, it has to be respectful of the community. And some of the options that we have are common entry. That's what this is called. So if you ever lived in a walk-up apartment building, you probably had a common entry. Courtyards, shop fronts, etc. You pick one of these frontage types, and it's going to depend on the building that you build. And then we have rules, some basic rules as to what are the dimensional requirements, things like that, how tall, how wide. Again, it's intended to give the builder, the applicant, the designer choices, but it's also intended to give the community some confidence that they know within reason what to expect. There are other code elements. There's just, always with the code, it's super complex. And so there are pieces like the site development standards. What do we require for lighting and landscaping and screening? Something as simple as how do you measure the height of a building? That's important. It's important that everybody's on the same page there. And so definitions for that. Speaking of definitions of words that, we want clarity about. And then we have large site standards. I think one of the things that we anticipate over time is that we have a lot more retail, a lot more commercial than is sustainable. I don't know how many people in this room order things online. Amazon's the second biggest retailer in the country. That's not going away. And I think that over time we anticipate that shopping centers will transition. And if you have a big shopping center that transitions, you can think about a former industrial site. You think about Grandview Crossing or Grandview Yard or Jeffrey Park. Then here are some rules to kind of help make sure that when that gets developed, it adds up to a walkable community. I got to keep moving here because I know you guys have a lot of questions and comments. Market-driven parking, some of you have heard about that. This map shows cities across the country that have eliminated all parking requirements citywide. And the list on the right is a list of peer cities that have done that. So Austin, Buffalo, Minneapolis, Portland, Raleigh, Richmond, San Jose, and these are not all really urban East Coast cities. These aren't, many of these are cities that are pretty auto-oriented, and they've eliminated parking requirements. So why have they done that? It, in Columbus, and I think probably almost everywhere, is the #1 topic of variances. All it takes is one car space to be lacking on a site. And again, there's no consideration for the users, whether they actually have cars. Is there bus service? Can you walk to it? It's all, the code doesn't know any of that. It's the most common variance, and it's often a real barrier for small businesses and reusing older buildings. We have corridors like Main Street, like West Broad Street, like Cleveland Avenue, that have buildings that have been vacant for a long time. On Parsons Avenue, we had somebody that wanted to open a coffee shop. Everybody wants a coffee shop. Building was built before zoning, built before World War II. It had 0 parking spaces. Code says you need 20. Everybody was on board with supporting that, but that costs time and money for a nonprofit trying to adaptively reuse a vacant building. There's a lot of unrealized potential. You look at this picture, and you can take this picture anywhere in our suburban city, part of the city, and there's just a lot of capacity for additional development that's sitting unused because of parking requirements that are just really no longer working for us. We have not had minimum parking requirements in downtown for 20 years. And I think one of the things that we've learned is that people know the market. Nobody wants to build an apartment building or spend a lot of money trying to attract tenants only to have them refuse to lease or move in because you don't have parking. People provide it. They figure this out. So again, we're going to talk more about parking on June 6th, but I just wanted to give you a preview. What's the strategy? We need to invest in transit. We need to invest in pedestrian and bicycle systems. We want better transit in Columbus. We know that. You don't get better transit without development that supports it. They go together. It's not a chicken and an egg, it's both. We're going to be reviewing development proposals for the potential parking impacts. We're not just going to say, oh, it's all going to work out. We are going to be looking at what is the parking solution that a project is proposing. We're going to work with applicants to mitigate impacts, especially off-site impacts. And in some cases, we may be working with them to take some additional steps to make sure that the project isn't a problem. But one of the things that our peer cities have told us, one of the things that we've seen in downtown, is that the vast majority of projects provide the parking they need. And if the builder or the designer or the developer doesn't want to do it or the business doesn't want to do it, a lot of times their bank wants them to do it. So you have a lot of checks in place to make sure that parking is provided. We just want to get away from this situation where we're doing it project by project. And then finally, these mitigation measures, it could be, loading and rideshare zones. A lot of people get dropped off, picked up. A lot of stuff is being delivered, food's being delivered by car. ADA parking. In some cases, we may need to move to residential permit parking or time-restricted parking. Land use. This proposed rezoning will not require the removal of any existing uses or building. If you're seeing that in conversation, that's not true. If it's an existing use and it was a legally established use, I'm not talking about, building code issues and things like that. This code doesn't require you to remove it. So what does it say about land use? Residential uses are permitted by right throughout these districts. Right now, it's a mixed bag. These corridors, and I'm going to talk about the corridors, the where here in 1 minute, restrict residential uses in many cases. The ground floor of these corridors that we're talking about do not allow residential 80% of the time. Single-family homes will be permitted by right in all 6 mixed-use districts. Today, in the area that we're going to talk about, in the map I'm going to show you, there are 950 single-family homes. Over half of them are non-conforming. That means they're inconsistent with the existing zoning. That means if you try to sell your single-family home in one of these districts to someone else, their bank may say, wait, stop, that zoning doesn't permit single-family homes. We're making them permitted by right. Other uses, we've already talked about the fact that in the urban districts, we're going to move away from auto-oriented uses like gas stations, car washes, car sales, and so on. But if you're an existing use and you are not part of the new land use framework, but you were established legally, you're good. You continue to operate, you can expand up to 25%, you can sell it. The only way that goes away is if you choose as a property owner to cease that use, cease that operation. The choice is yours. Over time, we would anticipate as these corridors attract more and more housing and the market evolves, that some of these uses will go away, but this isn't forcing that. Okay, so we need to update the map. So where do we start? We're starting with key corridors, our main streets. These are places where improved transit, housing options, and jobs can be focused. They allow for the efficient use of infrastructure and services. Our plans have been saying this is important for decades. In 2016, I think it was 2016, we updated the zoning for the University District. After decades of saying we ought to allow students to live close to campus, let's take the pressure off the single-family neighborhoods, the neighborhoods that have doubles and small, less density. But we weren't doing anything to enable it. So we finally increased the height limit and reduced the parking requirements on High Street and on Lane Avenue and on Fifth Avenue. And what we saw as a consequence was what we hoped for. Thousands of units were built on these main corridors that could accommodate it, and it took the pressure off the neighborhoods. This isn't to say that neighborhoods don't need new development. They do in some cases, but it is to say that these corridors, these main streets, are the best place to focus growth. You can't do everything at the same time, so where do you start? You start with a place that makes the biggest difference. Primary considerations as we picked places were Lincus corridors, COTA routes, existing service, adopted plan recommendations. Where do we have existing commercial zoning overlays? What's the existing zoning pattern and land use pattern? We also looked at, is it a corridor? Is it, a full intersection? Is it cohesive? Is it an area of significance? Again, what's the existing zoning land use pattern? I mentioned that. Public schools, Columbus Public Schools, parks not included in this for a variety of reasons. And in many cases, those facilities extend way into the neighborhood, and we didn't want to rezone those speculatively. We're not trying to complicate Columbus City Schools' decisions as they go through their work. And city parks, we don't want people to be worried about that. We're not proposing to develop city parks. And then there are just sometimes unique properties, like cemeteries. So we ended up with 140 miles of corridor, if you look at both sides of the street. If you're here tonight because you got a postcard, and it said that you are a property owner within an impacted area, then you're in one of these areas. And if you got a postcard saying you're within 125 feet, then you're close to one. So what can I tell you about these areas? 140 miles of corridor, over 12,000 parcels, 32 area plans today, probably 3 or 4 dozen existing zoning districts. There are 1,000 variances in place along these corridors. That means every time somebody tries to do something like expand a business or build something new, not every time, but many times, Because the current code is broken, they have to get an exception. They have to get a variance. And 1,000 may not sound like a big number to you, but that's a crazy high number for a zoning code. What that means is that our code is broken. 80% of these corridors, 80% of some of the busiest corridors in the biggest city in Ohio, one of the fastest growing cities in the country, have a height limit of 35 feet. That's the same as your single family neighborhoods. Another 80%, there's a lot of overlap, but it's not exactly the same, prohibit ground floor residential entirely. And in some cases, these sites don't allow residential at all. A few examples, we're getting close to the end. So on this map, we're at Hague and West Broad. And you've got West Broad Elementary at the northeast. I mentioned that's not included. The blue area is Urban General 1. And remember, that's 4 stories. It allows for a variety of residential and commercial and so on, not additional auto-oriented uses. The red, depending on what you're reading on that screen, is around the intersection. That's a major intersection. It's a major transit intersection. Is urban center, and that allows for 5-story buildings with the 2 additional stories for a commitment to affordability. 2 opposite ends of the spectrum here we have on the left. This is on Lockbourne Road, just north of Southgate. We have Urban General 2. It's all residential. It's set back a bit. And so the plan, or the code recognizes that. It calls for greater setbacks. It doesn't permit the full range of uses that some of the other ones do. But then the Brewery District on the right, urban core, this again is the densest area, close to downtown, close to Ohio State, close to Children's Hospital, these kinds of locations. 12 stories by right, and and up to 16 with an affordability bonus. I'm realizing as I think about parking that this may not have been clear. Our proposal is to eliminate the current parking requirement and allow projects to be right-sized based on their needs. And so when I talked about the strategies of monitoring projects, working with developers and applicants to determine how to offset any unintended impacts in the community, that is what that program is about. And then finally, the 2 suburban districts. This is Bethel Road, and if you've ever been to Micro Center to buy a computer, it's in the blue area. This is Olentangy Plaza. And this is a great example in many ways because it used to have a Kmart. The Kmart was redeveloped as an apartment building. And in many cases, we have too much commercial zoning, too many stores, and not enough people to shop in them, not enough customers. And right now, our zoning on a corridor like Cleveland Avenues or West Broad may say, you've got to build commercial on the ground floor. And all you're doing is adding competition to the existing buildings, existing businesses that may already be struggling to have enough customers. And so this allows for change over time to introduce different uses. So the gold or yellow is Community Activity Center. It allows up to 5 stories with 2 for a commitment to affordability extra. And then the Regional Activity Center is the one that allows 7 by right with an additional 3 stories for a commitment to affordability. Down to the end, unlocking potential. We looked at the current corridors. If we didn't change anything, and the market data, the market research and analysis suggests that they have the capacity for 6,000 units today. If we rezone based on this proposal, they have the capacity for 88,000 units over the course of the next 10 years, which is a huge impact on the 200,000 units that we need as a region. That concludes my presentation. You can learn more by going to our website, calling us, emailing us. I think that you'll find that information in a lot of what you've got at the handout. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Assistant Director. We're going to have council members that are in attendance tonight ask some questions. We'll direct those directly to Assistant Director Wheeler. If you want to kick to any of the additional administrative representatives, I'll let you sort of manage that. And then we'll go through with some questions from council, and then we'll turn it over to our public speaker. So with that, I want to allow Council President with any questions or comments.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start off by not following your rule. I don't have a question, more so a comment. So what we just heard was a lot of information, a lot of change to, again, a 70-year-old zoning code. But one of the things that Kevin Wheeler talked about was relieving pressure from neighborhoods. So all the change that we just talked about, all of the height differences that would be allowed, we're only talking about less than 5% of our city. We're talking about those high capacity corridors, not in your neighborhood, but those high capacity corridors to relieve the pressure in neighborhoods that we are feeling as we add 1 million people. Kevin, you kind of talked about this. So we're not the only city that has gone through zoning rewrites. Can you talk about other cities who are going through zoning rewrites and what they are seeing if they are a couple years ahead of us?
Sure. I think that, Minneapolis, which I think my colleague Aaron Prosser can talk a little bit more about, is a great example of a city that went through a similar amount of pressure, and they're landlocked. They don't have a lot of territory to work with, and they raised their height limits, eliminated parking requirements. Again, doesn't mean people don't provide parking. It just gives you flexibility. And in the end, what that allowed them to do was add a lot of units at a time of substantial need and shortfall. And Aaron, maybe you could speak to kind of what that did to their housing market.
I can. Okay, let's see if this is on. I actually have a couple of numbers. I'm somebody that really likes to look at the data and understand what the impact of these changes could be. And I know that those of us that are in the housing space and kind of live with this a lot, we look at that 88,000 number and it's really exciting, right? We want to make sure that there's enough housing for our existing residents and to make sure we have room for the folks that are joining us in Central Ohio. And when you look at what Minneapolis did, they did their zoning code update along their corridors in 2017. And that resulted in a pretty substantial increase in housing along those corridors. They ended up with a housing unit growth of about 12%. At the same time, they were growing in their population at about 10%. So they were keeping pace, right? They were adding that housing as those residents were coming in. As we look at where their rent growth happened in that same time period, and again, they're a growing city like we are, that rent growth was only 1%. It's a direct result of having enough. And I think when we look at Central Ohio, I'll give you the numbers for Central Ohio relative to that 88,000. When we look at adding that 88,000, that would represent about a 9.5% increase to the housing units we have in Columbus today. Deeply meaningful, but keeping that in perspective, right, is about 9.5% increase. Comparison, between 2010 and 2020, we added 15.1% to our population. And we didn't build enough housing. So in that time, we're looking at a year over year on our rent increases are 16.5%. That's a result of not having enough housing, right? We start to have that competition. And so when we look at an example like Minneapolis, we are not doing this, we have this incredible privilege of kind of coming behind some of these cities that have done this work. We're able to look at the outcomes that they were able to see, and then we're able to look at our corridors and say, is that appropriate for us to have that kind of density supported by transit, supporting our small businesses? And this proposal is very similar to what Minneapolis does. And again, when I think about that 16.5% rent increase in our community and the strain that that creates on our families, and contrary, you look at Minneapolis, which just gained that 1%, that is where I'd like to see Columbus. And so when we look at cities across the US, we can look at that relationship between having enough housing and then where that sits, not just with rent, but with our home prices as well. And making sure that our young families get engaged in home ownership, that there's opportunities for them in the neighborhood, is dependent upon having enough housing on those corridors.
So I'd like to start with a comment first, because now that we're in that vote zone. So I am originally from California, and I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for 20 years, an area that chose not to address their housing crisis. They just decided to let people continue building single-family homes, and so we had a lot of sprawl. In the 1980s, If you earned $100,000, you couldn't buy a home in the San Francisco Bay Area. In 1985, I was paying $2,000 a month rent for an old house. That's what happens. You end up having to move farther and farther away to get more affordable housing. Commuting an hour each way becomes your norm because you can't live in the community where you work. So I am excited to see the city of Columbus stepping up and taking action, because no one should have to live the way I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area. Change is hard. It is tough. I understand how people are feeling anxious. I served in the Westland Area Commission for 8 years, so anytime there was development, people always came and they talked about how anxious they were about change. We're a growing city, and change is here whether we like it or not. And so by taking this action, you're providing feedback on what you're hearing here, helps us create a preferred future instead of responding to the out-of-control condition that would happen otherwise. So I just wanted to offer that. My question is actually asking you to reiterate. In many of the zone-ins, I frequently received questions about, my house is in one of these corridors. What's going to happen to me? And you brought that up, but I would like you to reiterate that because it's a question that many people have.
Sure. Thank you for that reminder. Just that I think, again, over 900 single-family homes are in these corridors. Every one of the 6 corridors that I talked about has at least one or a few of these, and some have hundreds. And I think there was some anxiety when folks were hearing about this. Well, what is the city going to do? Let me be clear. If you have a single-family home on these corridors today, the new districts, if they're adopted as they are proposed, they allow single-family by right. You continue to operate or have your single-family home as long as you want it. If you own a single-family home, you don't have to tear it down. At some point, as the council member mentioned, change is inevitable. We may not like it, but things do change over time, and we're trying to create a code that allows that flexibility to accommodate that. But what we don't want to do is cause problems for single-family homeowners. And so that over half that number, again, currently inconsistent with existing zoning. That doesn't mean that we're coming to tell you that you've got to leave your house, but what it does mean is that there are some constraints that many of these single-family homeowners have that they wouldn't have if we if council approves the code as currently proposed.
Councilor Marine. Thank you, colleagues. So one thing I wanted to point out, a couple of questions sort of at the start. So if you've been reading the newspaper the last couple of weeks, you've heard several heartbreaking stories about longtime residents being displaced from apartment complexes in Columbus. And I think one of our neighbors who's been affected by that is here with us tonight. And when we talk about the supply and demand crisis right now, there's an incentive for folks to buy up housing in Columbus, throw some paint, maybe some cheap floors, and double the rent, right? And that is unfortunately what has happened to too many of our neighbors across Columbus, particularly over the last month or so. And the reason that there's an incentive to do so is that supply and demand equation being off, right? Because there's not more housing being built, there's a financial incentive to buy existing housing, again, throw on some paint, and double the rent, right? So in some instances, triple. That is what displacement looks like. So, I had, a resident the other day sort of ask me, you talk about how this can prevent displacement. By allowing there to be more supply, it removes that incentive from bad actors from displacing our friends and neighbors in this community. So when we talk about needing more supply to meet that demand, you won't have to look much further than the pages of the newspaper over the last couple of weeks to see the real-life, heartbreaking example of what that means to residents here in Columbus. So I know it can be very easy to get lost in some of the numbers, but some of those stories that I've heard, and certainly some of those that have been in the media, are just heartbreaking. And that is certainly one of the main points of why we think the time is now, is to change our code from being so reactive to being proactive. But with that, Assistant Director Wheeler, I wanted to talk, one of the other points of question or concern I think we've heard from a number of folks, we're in this comment period, is we've heard a lot of folks say, whoa, 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 where did this come from, right? This is moving really fast. I've only heard of it now. And for me, this is something that we've tried to be incredibly transparent as a city, as the administration, I think as council, to let folks know what this is, and again, what it isn't. A 60-day comment period is the longest that I think I have ever seen on any piece of legislation during my 5+ years at Columbus City Council. This is the first of 3 public hearings we're having. But as you pointed out, I think in one of your original slides, there was a lot of work to get us to the development. So I think when we hear that from residents saying, whoa, 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 where did this come from? I think there's many residents that are aware of the conversation, but not necessarily what the proposal is. But it's difficult for folks to react to something that hasn't been proposed yet. I wanted to, if you could walk us through sort of how we got to the proposal itself, using some of that public information that was gathered, and certainly all the different analysis that both our city planners did, but also experts that we've hired in order to evaluate not only what these market conditions look like in Columbus, but also to learn from other cities. As the council president pointed out, we are not the first to do this. We're learning lessons from others along the way. And that's a really long wind up, and I'm going to stop talking now.
Yeah, you're going to have to help me out because I may not cover everything. I'll do my best. But we definitely, as a city, have been thinking about this really, again, for decades. And in a little bit, I'm going to ask Mark Dravilis, the planning administrator, to comment on some of our area plans and what this does for them, or how this is related to them. But it is the case that really, since we publicly launched this work in November of 2022 with Undesigning the Red Line, a series of presentations that traveled around the city, really kind of explaining and doing it was an exhibit that did I think a fantastic job of explaining how redlining and deed restrictions have shaped many of our cities, including Columbus. And for those of you who don't know it, are not familiar with the term, redlining was a way it was a federal program established to assess risk of federal loans being provided in different neighborhoods. And areas were designated as one of 4 colors. And green was best, I believe, and red was definitely viewed as the riskiest. And the guidance, the language that was used to make a determination of whether an area was red or not was blatantly racist. And folks that lived in redlined areas didn't have access to the investment or the loans from the federal government. And deed restrictions happening at the same time meant that if you were African American, you couldn't own or live at a property in a particular neighborhood that had these restrictions. I mention that because we took seriously not the idea that we could come back and unroll those harms that had been done, but that we needed to be more thoughtful as we move forward, recognizing what this past had looked like. And so that really began for us a chance to start having conversations with folks. And we did surveys, we met with folks in the community, and we took very seriously this objective of reaching beyond our normal public engagement process. I mean, typically we might have a few meetings in an evening. If you work late, you can't go. If you have a second job, if you have kids, you're a single parent, you can't make it. It's one night, you're out of luck if you didn't do it. This time, we worked really hard to connect with folks, constituencies that often are missing from the conversation. So that's renters. I said earlier, we did 78,000 postcards to renters last fall. We've never done that. We wanted to make sure that they were understanding what's happening. We did online surveys. We did 100, I'm sure it's closing in on 200 out in the community conversations. We did one-on-one conversations with folks. We used phone, we talked to people, we went places, we went to libraries, we engaged in a lot of different ways. One of the objectives that I'm really proud to say we had an impact on, you know, and it's never what you want it to be, but we saw significant engagement from renters, minority groups, African Americans, folks that, again, not always part of the conversation. And so, you know, that was one of the things that we focused on. And what we hear as we do that is we need better transit. We need to be able to get around our community. We need access to jobs. We need more housing. Housing is a big problem. The number one indication of folks who want to see a lot of this work undertaken is age. Younger people are facing a different future. I'm not trying to be dramatic, but if you know somebody that's at that stage of life, or maybe not, maybe it's an older stage, you know that that's a real problem. And so we were hearing these things over and over again, and so they began to inform our priorities. There's a direct line between what we're hearing in the community broadly and what we felt like we needed to try to address. And zoning is not a panacea. It doesn't fix everything, but it's one place to start. And so this is, what can we do? And this is something we can do. I'm sorry, Council President Pro Tem, I'm losing. Other cities, really quickly, and then I do want Mark to mention a few things. We saw Austin, we saw Seattle wait too long. Austin in particular has a lot of similarities to Columbus. And it's like looking 10 years into the future and saying, whoa, I don't want to do that. So again, we can say that we don't like certain things, and it's appropriate for us to be debating and talking about the details, but change will happen, and that pressure means that we don't have the time to wait. Mark, do you want to just talk a little bit about area plans and their connection to this?
Sure, thanks, Kevin. And I think it relates back to some, like, where did this come from? And Kevin had a slide up earlier that mentioned of the 140 miles of corridor, there's 32 adopted neighborhood plans in place. And these are plans, so Kevin's been at this work for 30 plus years. I've been along with him for about 20. Christine's been with us for more than she might care to recognize. But I got to thinking that each one of these plans generally takes about 2 years of public engagement. 32 of them, 64 years of public engagement. We didn't do all of them, we did a lot of them. I can tell you that very consistent themes that we would hear from folks, and every one of these engagements was a similar conversation. Change is occurring, how do we accommodate it? How do we make the most of it? How do we make it equitable? Consistent themes is put the density on corridors, provide housing options on the corridors. We want a more walkable neighborhood. We want quality design standards. It shouldn't just be for one neighborhood or for another neighborhood. We want the quality design standards on our main street also. And if we need to reduce parking requirements in order to preserve a building or to provide housing, that we should do this. This is literally the priorities that we have heard for decades in our planning processes. And I could say, thanks, Kevin, for the chance to talk on this, because it's heartening that we're bringing forth a code that delivers on plan recommendations that have been in, that are 32 plus plans for decades. And it's a rare opportunity for a planner to be able to bring this forward, and it's sort of like delivering on a promise that we've made to communities for decades now, is like, this is the way we want to grow. So I personally feel that this is one of the primary bases for the effort that we're making. And indeed, as we needled through every one of these corridors, and I could say that this guy looked at every parcel that is, has a recommendation in this code, we're like, what does the plan say? What has the community been saying? So this is a great opportunity as far as planning in Columbus is concerned.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask two more very short questions, because the whole point of this hearing is to get to the public feedback. So one, we've heard about the 6 different zoning districts. So, and we've also heard about the map, right? So I want folks to speak about sort of how, one, were these specific areas chosen. So again, this is not the whole city. This is about 4% of the parcels within the city. And each of those parcels, to the point that Mark just made, have a specific designation. That may mean the height limit goes up to 4 stories. It may mean it goes up to 12 stories. What is the evaluation that occurred to determine which parcel gets what designation?
Thank you, Councilmember Dorans. So we did have a consultant team that helped us, and they have the benefit of bringing in perspective and experience that as a staff you're not planning for the whole country, and these folks did work in many cities throughout the country. And one of the things that they did was just kind of affirm that there is a benefit to focusing in on key corridors. You heard Aaron earlier talk about what Minneapolis did and why that made a difference. You heard me talk about how we did that in the University District and how that made a difference. So we started with, you can't do everything at once. Where do you start? You start on corridors, and our consultant team was really helpful in kind of zeroing in on that recommendation. I think once you've decided corridors, the question then is which ones. And we knew that we really wanted to try to build a more transit-friendly city, a more walkable city. We wanted to do a better job of connecting people to jobs, housing choices, education, and healthcare. And, not everybody has a car. Not everybody can afford to buy a car. We have projects in the city, developments in the city where folks have the access to transit and walkable neighborhoods, and they don't use their cars, or maybe they don't have them. And we wanted to find a way of making sure that we were encouraging more development in the places that could support transit. So we started by looking at transit corridors, and as I mentioned earlier, we looked at where do plans recommend existing mixed use? Where do we already have a pattern of mixed use? So, once you've chosen the corridors, and there will be future phases, and we'll be adding more areas. I'm sure that we're going to miss some areas that we need to come along behind this first phase and add to the equation. And we're also ultimately going to be looking at neighborhoods and how do we make them work better. But again, this focus on corridors is really adding the density and the capacity where we feel we could support it. So now there's six different districts. We didn't start out with 6 districts. Our consultant team led us in looking at these corridors. How big are the parcels? Do they have alleys? Do they have sidewalks? What's the existing zoning? What's the existing land use pattern and development pattern? And what you realize is that 140 miles of corridor aren't all the same. And right now, I mentioned that we have close to 40 different zones in place covering these districts. They're not like unique to the area. It's just a patchwork. What we did instead was try to create zones or districts that were designed around these different development types and these different neighborhood conditions. And so that's really where that came from. And there were hours upon hours of really working with the consultant team and staff. This was a collaborative effort. And, a workshop series that we did in the fall was, we weren't ready to call them, mixed use 1 and 2. We didn't know yet. But we asked people, hey, help us to understand these corridors. And that was really informative as well. So that's how we came to them. And you go to our website, you look at our map, you can zero in on any area, it'll tell you. You can come to our gallery. You don't do computers, you don't want to come downtown, you call us.
Thank you. And I think that's one of the important things is that get on that website so you can see what has been proposed specifically for your neighborhood, because it is customized. It is not a one-size-fits-all solution, which is mainly what our code currently does. The last question I have before we turn it over to public comment is we have a number of current and former area commissioners that are here with us tonight. And I've heard from many already, and these are folks that have dedicated countless hours of service to the city in any number of different ways. But prominently, the Columbus City Code recognizes area commissions as the official advisory body to council for all rezonings and variance requests in the city. Again, folks have taken so much time out of their lives to be that neighborhood voice through that vital institution that we have at those area commissions. question that has been proposed many times is, how does this proposal affect those area commissions?
So just a few things to clarify for the beginning. This proposal does not eliminate Area Commission review of variances and rezonings. That will continue. If anybody proposes a variance or rezoning, Area Commissions will continue to have the same opportunity to review them. And because this update is focused on corridors, the vast majority of most Area Commissions will remain unchanged in this phase. And we anticipate variances even to this proposal. The desire, the hope is that we will have fewer of them. Right now, many area commissions are spending a lot of time reviewing projects like that community grounds coffee shop. That's a waste of time. It's a waste of time for the commission and the community, and it's a waste of time for the applicant to do something that everybody wants them to do. And I think one of the things that is important to recognize is that our code doesn't work the way it's supposed to work. You all are involved in important work of trying to salvage projects from a code that is really misaligned with where we're trying to go as a community. And so this is an opportunity, a very rare opportunity, to reset, to establish a zoning code that actually works for our community. It includes design guidelines. Many neighborhoods, many area commissions do not have the benefit of design guidelines because they're not a historic district. Their zoning code doesn't speak to that. I'm seeing Peggy Williams in the audience tonight. Miss Peg is somebody that has spent a lot of time trying to work through this stuff, creating a more straightforward code that provides clear guidance on projects and expectations is a really important step in moving forward in terms of area commissions. And I think one of the things that we hope is that it allows some opportunity to focus on additional things beyond just zoning. There's a lot going on in our neighborhoods that would benefit from additional engagement.
Thank you, Assistant Director. So we're going to move to the public comment portion of tonight's hearing. We have received 13 pieces of written legislation in advance of tonight's hearing and hundreds of comments to the Zone-In website. And if folks have not visited that website, I highly encourage you to do so. That is where you can see, again, what has specifically been proposed within your area. There's also in the back, the zoning team has iPads in which you can view that here tonight if you have not done so already. All that public comment is going to be provided to Columbus City Council prior to any vote on this topic. Again, tonight's hearing is the overview and sort of the initial public feedback. Our next public hearing will focus on housing and parking, and the final hearing will be an evaluation of that feedback that Council has received. I speak for myself, and I believe my colleagues when I say we are trying to be radical listeners, as we know this is a big change to how things currently operate. But with that, I would like to turn to our public speakers tonight. So again, the mic is over here. Kevin, if you want to, again, point out for folks that came in late, if you have not signed up to speak and you would like to, Kevin McCain is your guy to fill out a speaker slip. I will try to cut this off at some point so we can keep our evening moving on, but I'm going to announce one public speaker and I'm going to announce the one after them, and if you are the second one, please come up to the mic so that we can keep this moving. I will try and distill, if there's a specific question or a comment for the administration to react to, I will try and distill that down, try and make it as comprehensive as possible, and direct that to Assistant Director Wheeler, who may then engage one of the other folks from the administration. If I do apologize, if I do mispronounce your name, please charge that to my head and not my heart. As someone with a funny last name, I know how that feels from time to time to experience that. And if I do mispronounce your name, please correct it when you're at the podium. So without further delay, again, we'll try to keep comment to about 3 minutes apiece if we're able to. But first we have Mr. And if you are here representing any organization, please let us know that as well at the beginning of your comments. So the first public speaker come for council is Mr. Mike Primo, and the next speaker after that is Mr. Sam Zimmerman. Thank you, Mr. Primo. Again, the next speaker to come for council, Mr. Sam Zimmerman, and after him will be Mr. Curtis Brown.
Mayor, thank you, Council President Hardin, members of the City Council. I'm here to express my wholehearted support of the zoning proposal championed by the Mayor of the City Council. My name is Sam Turner. I'm the public address expressing the need for increased housing accessibility for every resident of Columbus. We're pleased with the way zoning legislation makes a decisive shift from outdated zoning practices which favor specific areas of our city to a more inclusive approach that encourages housing development throughout Columbus, with a particular emphasis on mid and lower income populations. I wish to commend the mayor and city council for their foresight in recognizing the need to update the city's zoning laws and their commitment to addressing them comprehensively. However, I come to you today with a specific request to include our property at the intersection of Olentangy and Henderson Road in Phase 1 of Zone In. Allow me to present several compelling reasons why our site is an ideal candidate for Phase 1 and why we meet all of the city's criteria for inclusion. 1. At over 20 acres in size, our location can accommodate no fewer than 400 housing units, with a very high likelihood of a significant portion being targeted to workforce housing pursuant to the zoning legislation's affordable bonus provisions. More supply. Critically, our property is situated directly along Olentangy River Road, which has been identified as the Link Us corridor for Northwest Columbus, offering future residents immediate access to BRT public transportation. As Councilmember Dorans aptly stated, every Link Us corridor is a Zone In corridor. 3. Our property is one of only a handful identified as having, quote, high development potential in the June 2020 Link Us Foundation report. 4, inclusion in Phase 1 is 100% compatible with the Northwest Area Plan, which states office, institutional, medical, and/or multifamily are recommended for this 20-acre site. 5, our property is in close proximity to dozens of sites already identified on the initial Phase 1 map. 6, multifamily housing at this location is compatible with adjacent uses, which are 100% commercial and multifamily to the north and west, with Highway 315 to the east and Henderson Road to the south, which is 6 lanes and 50 miles an hour. 7, with the creek on our 20-acre property, we qualify for the city's stream corridor protection plan. Development under Phase 1 zoning can align with the protection plan, leveraging the creek as a feature, not a hindrance. 8, crucially, the necessary sewer and water infrastructure to support the development on our site are already underway, thanks to the city's significant investment in the Olentangy Tunnel project. These funds include $1.8 million to specifically address the needs of the Knowles neighborhood. In essence, our property presents a profoundly appealing opportunity to advance the city's housing, mobility, and equity goals rapidly. By approving its designation as a Phase 1 Zone In approved property, you will not only address critical housing needs, but also set a powerful example of proactive leadership in our community. Thank you for considering my appeal, and I eagerly anticipate the opportunity to collaborate with the City of Columbus to create a more equitable and prosperous future for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. I will ask that the department prepare a response and then provide that potentially at our third public hearing, which is the evaluation of public comment about whether or not there's an opportunity. This is a request that's been made of I think a number of property owners near Phase 1 corridor or Phase 1 zoning corridors. At this point, we don't have a specific process or plan about how that would work. So I'm going to ask the department to go ahead and evaluate that, and for that third hearing for us to be able to have them directly respond to that. Unless, Assistant Director, do you have any comments you would like to share at this time?
I do not.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Curtis Brown, and the speaker after Mr. Brown is Mr. Tim Bibler.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Curtis, and I am just a citizen of the far south side of Columbus, and I'm reaching out to express some concerns that I have regarding our citizens' zoning and development, including CAC zoning. I would like to begin by addressing the design standards within the zoning initiative. While these standards are intended to be minimal, they risk being overly prescriptive, potentially leading developers to opt for the cost-effective bare minimum rather than creating spaces that enrich our neighborhood's identities. Further, with these design standards, there is nothing differentiating us from other developing CAC zones. Neighbors will have to watch as similar structures sprout up all over the city. If there are any goals to maintain individuality in an area, it would be difficult to do so in this fashion. We must hold developers to higher standards and ensure that the design guidelines contribute positively to Columbus's unique character across different areas. In regards to broader concerns about zoning, I want to address the involvement of a PR firm in the initiative. While I understand that external support is common, recent allegations have raised doubts about the transparency of the process. Fabricated testimonies and quotes attributed to officials undermine the trust that we have placed in our government's decision-making. Areas like the often overlooked Far South deserve transparency and genuine community engagement in initiatives like zoning. We need to ensure that decisions are truly reflective of government input and not influenced by external agendas. In the end, the whole initiative seems built on hope. Hope that we will have the transportation, hope that parking demands are met, hope that the zones will increase housing, hope that the increased housing will decrease property costs, hope that more housing will reduce the cost of rent, hope that these new developments will take advantage of affordable housing, hope that the modules will still provide interesting and unique buildings, hope that how we wrote this will reduce variances, and we hope that these changes are flexible enough to meet the needs of any district. Shannon Hardin told the dispatch that his greatest fear is that the average citizen resident is not paying close enough attention to what the city is doing. A greater fear may lie that the city is not paying close enough attention to its developers. Ultimately, the biggest question is, how will we know? How are we going to measure the success of zoning as it expands through Columbus? And perhaps more importantly, how will we adapt to the legislation if these hopes are not realized? Thank you.
Thank you. So one thing to make very clear is that the reference of a PR contract has nothing to do with Columbus City Council. The legislation has been proposed, it has moved to our body. It is for a evaluation and potential amendment by this legislative body, and ultimately, as the council president said, this body will vote. And any changes will be driven by our evaluation of this. That's primarily based upon the public feedback that we will receive at events like this. As I mentioned at the outset of this hearing, this is one of the longest public comment periods that this body has ever had, and there's a reason for that. We know this is the big change, and when the council president says his fears about people not paying attention, we are trying to do our best to make sure that folks are paying attention and understand what this is, and again, what it isn't. And I do want to direct the comment directly to Assistant Director Wheeler, specifically around the design standards. And if I could distill that down to, I think the concern regarding how those design standards being baked into the code may set a good floor, but that may lead to uniform development that lacks individual character around the city. I don't know if you have any response at this time.
Sure. I mean, I think one thing I would say is that the current code doesn't know the difference between different neighborhoods either, at all. We're developing a code that does have different districts designed for different development types. Right now, if you look at the city, development patterns, there's just a reality that development patterns do tend to be consistent in different types of neighborhoods. This is not a new thing. I think what we would also say is that we're going to be monitoring this code. We recognize that we're not going to get everything right the first time. I think one of the things that, we're going to be looking at is what are we seeing in the way of buildings? But right now, what the code allows you to do is a flat building with no architectural or design differences or distinctions. Yeah, it could be 35 feet tall and no taller, but it doesn't have to be interesting. It doesn't have to be broken up. It doesn't have to have any kind of design considerations that we think make a difference. And I'm going to ask if anybody else has anything to, has anything to offer there. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Director. Our next speaker is Mr. Tim Bibler, and then after Mr. Bibler, we have Al Drinks.
Thank you. And the name's Bibler, but that's okay. I support responsible housing policies that adds to the housing supply and protects the current housing inventory. This zoning proposal does not require developers to determine the impact of parking on a neighborhood before they start building. Eliminating all parking requirements removes a valuable tool used by the German Village Commission to protect the historic features in German Village. This zoning proposal does not protect or does not allow citizens a voice to protect landmarks or protect neighborhoods' unique features. It is concerning that this zoning proposal is being justified in giving developers more power to add housing, while at the same time, other city policies give developers power to remove housing from the current housing stock. Nothing is being done to protect the current housing stock from being converted into Airbnb short-term rentals. Hundreds of houses have been and are being converted to short-term rentals, including tax-abated apartments. If this zoning is about increasing housing, then why isn't anything being done to protect the current housing stock from being converted into short-term rentals? And they also had a question, am I correct in that the information you provided today does not show us the specific districts where they're located?
Assistant Director, can you talk through how folks need access to that on the website?
Yeah, I mean, it's 140 miles of corridor, so it's difficult to...
Excuse me. That is, my question is, it's not presented here tonight for people to see.
Well, it's very difficult to actually print that off. So
Yeah.
there are iPads, and you can go look at that in the rear of the room.
We have lists. We will get this information to you if you don't use the computer. We have lists on our website of every parcel. You can zero in on an individual property, and that's one reason why for 2 months, 60 days, we have a gallery open 6 days a week. So you can come down and we'll work with you one-on-one to show you what the proposal, where the proposal's covering. I would say too, and I wanted to mention this, it was negligent earlier. You mentioned German Village, and this proposal does not change historic designations. If a property is part of a historic district, a locally designated district, they will continue to, projects there will continue to require review by the German Village Commission or the Italian Village Commission or whatever the location is. And those commissions not only have the ability to approve projects, but there's also demolition control in some of those areas. So I just want to make clear that we're not proposing changes to that, that current condition.
Oh, I have a question though. Currently, the commission has the right to consider parking in anything that is built regarding German Village area. Your proposal removes that ability for the commission to look at parking for any new development, correct?
That is correct.
And that is a major tool that has been used to protect the neighborhood. The other just brief comment is you talk about the impact of a particular property in the zoning area. You don't speak to the impact that a neighborhood adjacent to the property will have.
So to be clear, and we are once again going to be talking more about parking, specifically in housing, at the June 6th hearing. When I say that the city is going to be looking at impacts, it is the impact of a project on the surrounding area, the off-site area. And to be clear, I think in the case of German Village, I just want to make sure that folks don't misunderstand this. This proposal focuses on one part of German Village, the south side of Livingston Avenue, which is the northern edge of German Village across the street from downtown, and a corridor that has bus service. So we are not proposing rezoning the neighborhood. This is limited to Livingston Avenue.
Assistant Director, just to clarify, I think the part of that question, the elimination on parking minimums is only on parcels that are in the zone-in phase one. So an adjacent parcel, others, so areas that have historic review commissions or others, whatever parking requirements exist for the rest of the 96% of the city would not be disturbed by this legislation. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. And speaking,
Just one other question. If a development creates a parking problem, what is the plan to correct the problem?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part of your question.
If a developer develops a property that creates a parking issue, a problem for a neighborhood adjacent to the development, what is the plan to correct the parking problem after the apartment or the development has already been built?
We're going to talk, we don't have the right folks here to answer all your parking questions tonight. That's why we have another hearing focused on
Yep.
that. I encourage you to come back on the 6th, talk more about that.
yeah, and we'll make sure that question is specifically asked at that hearing. And I think one of the other questions that was raised was regarding short-term rentals. That is separate from zoning, but it's certainly a related matter. My office has actually sponsored a number of pieces of legislation to enhance our registration and licensing requirement with short-term rentals. There's been a proposal that has been submitted to council by a number of area commissions that have worked very diligently on this topic. I think we're actually in the process of setting up some meetings with those folks. My hope is that when council is on recess in August, that we'll be able to pick up and actually bring forward some legislation in the fall that would address some of those key concerns that folks have articulated, which I think are real concerns as they relate to short-term rentals, again, potentially displacing folks from neighborhoods, but also we know that there's been some public safety concerns that have happened at short-term rentals, and we know that while many short-term rental operators in the city have been good neighbors and good folks to work with, we also know that there's some bad apples out there, and we need to have the appropriate regulation in place in order to deal with those bad apples. So again, not necessarily a zoning or zone-in topic, but certainly as we talk about housing writ large and how that affects neighborhoods, it's certainly a concern that I think we've had a number of neighborhood voices bring to council that I personally plan to work on heading into the fall. Again, our next speaker was Mr. Al Drinks, but I don't see him here. The next speaker is Ms. Carly Booz, and after her, Ms. Shannon Isom. I don't think she's here.
Aren't you all impressed I didn't fall in these shoes? Thank you, council members. My name is Carly Booz. I'm here with the Affordable Housing Alliance of Central Ohio. And earlier this weekend, we sent out a newsletter sharing some of our reflections on zoning. In that newsletter, we highlighted zoning research from around the country that can help inform our local conversation. And we do this quite often because we really do believe that when we are all working from facts and from evidence-based findings, and we are educated in what's possible, that we are absolutely capable of getting ahead of our housing problem and solving this challenge as a community. We wrote about how zoning reform can expand affordability. We detailed how an outdated code adds costs to housing that many of us cannot afford, how it removes personal choice in the kind of homes that we live in, how it artificially suppresses construction, and how it empowers oppositional voices over other neighbors. The research largely finds that zoning reform reduces housing costs, sometimes by a little, sometimes by a lot. But by pairing zoning with other tools like grants and tax relief and resident protections, we can extend affordability even deeper and prevent displacement. That's why the Alliance supports Zone In as an essential piece of our housing puzzle. Perhaps most importantly, our newsletter concluded by stressing how essential public feedback is and an equitable path forward. When this code was written 70 years ago, the views of a few were prioritized over the needs of many. When homeowners' opinions mattered more in the 1950s, and when women's opinions and communities of colors mattered less. We are humbled that today the robust conversation and hearings like this are informing not just the path forward, but the draft that we have in front of us. It is vitally important that those who give testimony tonight are heard, and it is equally important that we remember the thousands of people who have already shared their voices and created that draft. Those neighbors overwhelmingly demanded more affordability, as well as more walkability, more density, and more housing. This draft does honor that demand, as well as the demands of the 89% of Americans who expect their elected representatives to do more to promote affordable housing. After sending that newsletter, I almost immediately received an email accusing me and all of the other nonprofits who have had the privilege to stand with in calling for zoning reform for years of failing to respect, quote, citizens who pay the bills. And if you go on Twitter right now, you will find things a lot more blunt and a lot more harmful, and I think a lot less reflective of the city that I have always been proud to be in. And I have been sitting with that message for days, and I continue to be struck by the complete lack of caring and complete lack of understanding for so many of our neighbors. Because our people are already paying this bill. Our people are paying for the housing crisis with their lives and with their children's lives now. We are paying for it with evictions. We are paying for it not with just the 24,000 evictions we saw last year, but all of the no-fault evictions we are seeing now in Riverview and Griggsview and Sandridge. We are paying for it with 40% or 50% or 60% property tax increases for our homeowners because we are continuing to add fuel to the supply and demand fire every day that we fail to build the housing that our people need. We are absolutely paying for it when the Brookings Institute ranks us 54th out of 54 cities for racial inclusion, and we are for sure paying for it when the Community Shelter Board says we have run out of housing when they report yet another record-breaking year for homelessness. There are people in our community who don't have to struggle with housing, who are allowed to be unaware of this problem and this pressure that all the rest of us are feeling. No one is here to disrespect them. Instead, what we want to do is create a world where their experience is universal, where every single one of us, where all of our people, and not just a select few, have a decent and a safe and affordable place to call home. Zoning reform can, and here in Columbus, it must move us closer to that goal. I want to thank you for your continued leadership and for your support of Zone In and helping drive Columbus towards that future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Booz. Our next speaker was Ms. Shannon Isom. She unfortunately was not able to stay with us. Our next speaker is Ms. Becky Walcott, and after that, Mr. Curtis Davis.
Hi, good evening. My name is Becky Walcott, and I am a community leader in my neighborhood. I wanted to speak tonight about some of the topics that residents in my area and all over this city have brought up. I have worked on, I don't know, countless zonings. What I'd like to tell you is that the design standards are what excited me about Zone In. Frontage types, are you kidding me? We've never been offered frontage types. Developers and their attorneys can come in to our meetings, right? And they can negotiate things like trees, lighting, in exchange for whatever they want. So they've been able to hold these things over our heads that now become a design standard. And when I talk to commissioners across the city, I know how many countless meetings we have hours we'll never get back, that we have spent negotiating for 12 2-foot tall evergreens, and 6 die before the building opens. It's kind of sad, right? But it happens. I mean, I actually have photos. I'll share them with you. But also, and I challenged my community at a recent meeting, a couple of things. I said, listen, you can listen to the guy on social media from the community, right, who read Zone In or said they did, and they told you their version, okay? You can do that. But I don't take that guy's medical advice, and I wouldn't let that guy tell me what house to buy, what pillow to buy, what to feed my family. I'm going to learn this for myself. So I challenge everybody, get to the gallery. It's fabulous. Another thing I say to my family a lot, close Facebook, close TikTok, find something educational and informational, learn something, get a new wrinkle on the brain. Literally, click on Zone In on your smartphone and learn what's going on. Now, frankly, I'm going to say this, and this is going to get a little backlash, but trust me, I can take it. If you are a resident of the city of Columbus and you don't know anything about Zone In, and you've never heard this term, you chose a long time ago not to know, quite frankly. I'm kind of tired of the word Zone In, to be honest with you. I will tell you that our commission has had to hold 2 months in a row now, going on 3, additional meetings so that we could educate the community, but also so we can hear the zoning applications that always come with a variance. So again, frontage types, design standards, hallelujah, thank you. It's about time. And I'm going to say this, if you've not spent countless hours working on zonings for your community, you may not be aware of this. Another challenge that I said to my community was go up and down High Street, start at 104, head south to 270. Tell me how many of those buildings or littered, unmowed lots you're fighting for today. Those vacant and abandoned buildings and those littered lots that our code enforcement officers spend countless hours tracking down the owner, let's get it mowed, get it cleaned up, blah, blah, blah. Those are homes. Those are future homes for our families. So I applaud Zone In. I appreciate the work that went into it. I have worked on an area plan. They're horrible. They're a lot of work, but they're needed. So I can't even imagine taking on Zone In. But I want to thank all of you for your hard work. And I will tell you again that if we have a resident that hasn't made their way to the gallery, get there. I was there for an hour and a half. I had undivided attention. Sadly, there were only 2 other people in the building with me, but a fellow commissioner came with me. We asked countless questions. The chart that breaks down the districts, wonderful information. It makes it very easy. But again, look around your own communities and imagine housing for those that don't have them right now, that could never even dream of having a roof over their head for them and their families. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe our next speaker was supposed to be Mr. Curtis Davis, but I don't see him with us. Our next speaker is Mr. Eli Bonert, and after him will be Pastor O'Shea. I don't see Eli, so Pastor O'Shea, you are up next, and next is Ms. Ann Camrata.
Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. I'm Pastor Kujenga O'Shea, giving honor to God, city council members. Zone In Columbus. I have a letter here that's addressed to Mr. Charles Chubb Sr., care of Kujenga O'Shea, 1119 East 16th Avenue, Columbus, Ohio, from Department of Building and Zoning Services. It reads as follows. Department of Building and Zoning Services, Charles Chubb Sr., care of Kujenga O'Shea. Dear Mr. Chubb, in accordance with provisions of Columbus City Code, Section 4109.08 and Section 4701.88, a structure owned by Charles Chubb Sr. at 957 East 12th Avenue was demolished. The cost of the demolition was $27,012. Your check or money order for $27,012 should be made payable to the City of Columbus and mailed to the address below. Please be advised that in accordance with Columbus City Code, if the cost of demolition is not paid within 30 days, said cost will either be certified by City Council to the county auditor, at which time the cost becomes legal assessment against the property, or shall be collectible together with any interest thereon by suits for other debts of like amount are collectible. Sincerely, Michael Schwab, Nuisance Property Abatement Coordinator. This letter, certified letter that came to my house, Charles Chubb Sr., 957 East 12th Avenue. For 3 years, he waited on the waiting list to get his house repaired by the Critical Home Repair Program by the city. They lowered it from $120,000 to $45,000. 3 years he waited. Rita Paris asked the director, Mr. Stevens, to jump him up on the waiting list so he could get his house fixed. Wouldn't do it. House was torn down, demolished. The insurance company wouldn't pay for it because of the old house. So he ended up 1 week having to move. He moved. I got him in a hotel in Grove City. House is demolished, and now he's charged for $27,012 for the demolition. Right. If not, they're going to take his property. Righteousness by the city is not looked upon as righteousness by some of the senior citizens and the older residents of the Columbus community. They don't see the city as being righteous. Are you going to build your zoning and all of your new housing and complexes on the backs of stakeholders and senior citizens and poor folks? This is the problem that we're having. And nobody really is addressing that. Everybody seems to be afraid to talk about it. I took Mr. Charles Chubb to City Council, put him in front of City Council, asked for help. Mr. Stevens said he'd help him, didn't help him. Department of Neighborhoods didn't help him. Nobody helped him. So now he's in an apartment complex. Mr. Dorans has talked about the horror stories. This is one of the horror stories. There are many more. Is this how we're going to take and do the City of Columbus going to do the senior citizens and the stakeholders? Are we going to build the new houses on the backs of the city stakeholders? This is what we're talking about. Oh, your language sounds beautiful. Your packaging is beautiful. Everything sounds nice. But when it comes where the rubber meets the road, we have a problem. The problem is that the housing and the zoning codes and even the new developments that you're talking about are not beneficial to all of the senior citizens and the stakeholders and people with children and people who are losing their homes to these massive developments. Yes, you can have a great rah-rah rally for the massive developments and all of the developers. All this is great. But what about the poor folks on fixed incomes and fixed pensions? I think that this law should be repealed. 4109.08 or section 4701.08 should be repealed by the City of Columbus. That's my comment and my question.
Thank you, Pastor. That has obviously been a long-running issue that I don't have a good answer for. That has been a difficult path for that gentleman that has lived in that deteriorating house for a number of years. And certainly that bill is unacceptable at this point. And Council President and I have already talked about that, about what we need to do as a legislative body to work with the administration to take care of that. I don't have an answer for you here tonight, but I can tell you, we're here talking about updating our zoning code, which is focused on housing, and principally the city needs to do everything we can to preserve housing, particularly for senior citizens in this community. And that's certainly an instance in which a multitude of factors did not allow that individual to stay in their home. And my heart goes out to him, and we're going to keep talking about how we resolve that matter.
And there are a number of other people that are in the same situation. The houses are old, they're falling down. The city has cut the critical housing repair, can't get their houses repaired, and then once they're demolished, the developers come in, build on the land after the land is taken. Zone in Columbus.
Our next speaker to come before council is Ms. Ann Camrata, and after Ms. Camrata, Mr. Ben Keith is next.
Hi, this is scary. So I've lived and worked in Clintonville for 24 years. I want to say that I agree wholeheartedly with the need for more affordable housing in Columbus, and I want to see it in my neighborhood of Clintonville. And I also have concerns about some of the details in this plan. So I'm glad to hear Councilman Hardin say tonight that what these proposed changes look like is up for debate. I have a hard time trusting that developers will do what is right for neighborhoods rather than what is best for their bottom line. So my four main concerns are the following. Number one, this plan is being done in the name of affordable housing, and when I tried to research how affordable is defined, the only thing I could find on columbus.gov was affordable as defined by income levels at 80 to 100% of area median income, AMI, which means that for a family of four, that income would be $99,000, and therefore what would be considered affordable for that family is monthly rent of over $2,000. This is not truly affordable for most people who actually need affordable housing. At the same time, you're trading tax abatements for this false affordability, essentially funding more luxury apartments on the backs of our kids and Columbus taxpayers. I want to see that you either require truly affordable apartments at 60% of AMI or eliminate the tax abatements. Why sweeten the pot for developers with precious resources like our kids' school funding? Two of mine are in CCS schools, unless we are getting something truly valuable in return. Number two, I worry that the no minimum parking requirements will create congestion and increased fees for parking for current residents while maximizing profits for developers. I understand that mass transit needs density in order to be built. However, cars are a reality now, and better mass transit will not be a reality for decades. So until then, why not require a minimum parking requirement, something between what is required now and zero? Number three, the majority of parcels are planned to have little to none front or side setbacks. I would like to see more medium to large setbacks for designated green space. It not only makes our neighborhood more walkable, aesthetically pleasing, but more importantly, in the face of climate change, we should be increasing green space, not eliminating it. Studies show that neighborhoods with more trees and green space are cooler than the concrete jungles and canyon-like streets that are being proposed. Finally, number four, I've not heard any mention or consideration of protections for the natural environment in these neighborhoods. I would like to see environmental studies done on the impact of this development and its resulting stormwater increases on Clintonville's ravine ecosystems. Living in the 21st century, we know that the plants and creatures in the ravines are not independent of us. Let's not make the same mistakes that have been made time and time again by doing irreparable harm to our environment and in turn to ourselves in the name of development. These are incredibly complicated issues. This is not a question of being for this plan or being NIMBY. I think we all agree that Columbus is in need of affordable housing. I think that we can accomplish that by also taking into account residents' concerns for the environment, and not stealing money from our kids' public schools. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to try and get to a couple of the questions that were asked here tonight, and I think there's some follow-ups. Deputy Director, I wondered if you could speak towards, so the city changed its community reinvestment area policy this past year. So specifically the residents talking about how do you get to sort of 60, 80% AMI as it relates to particularly her neighborhood and sort of the Clintonville area, how that relates with potential new development that may be able to take advantage of that CRA policy and what that would sort of look like in her neighborhood. Because there is, when we talk about the definition of affordable housing, there's a lot of confusion around what that actually translates into units, and particularly because this council made significant reforms of that policy about a year ago, maybe a little bit longer, that the amount of affordability that housing providers have to offer gets deeper based upon where that project is located. This was a tool that was implemented that was supported by council in order to bring more affordable housing to all parts of Columbus, so it's not just focused in one area. And if folks want to have an incentive from the city, particularly in areas that are more affluent, they need to do more. And that's what that policy currently reflects. And particularly areas that are covered by Zone In, that kind of policy would come into play. So, Assistant Director, if you want to speak to that, and then I think I had a fronting question that I'll kick to Director Wheeler after that.
Thank you, Chair Dorans. Yes, happy to speak on the affordability. As we look at the Columbus housing strategy, certainly zone-in is part of that implementation and understanding that we need that supply. As I mentioned earlier, we look at those other cities, we can draw a direct correlation between having enough housing and maintaining that overall natural affordability. And when you look at Central Ohio, in 2010, we were a very naturally affordable place, right? A lot of folks had a lot of options in the marketplace. We had about 7% more housing units than we had households. That's a nice, flexible, healthy market. Again, we added a lot of folks to the community between 2010 and 2020. And people continue to move here for the job opportunities and other great parts of living in Central Ohio. By 2020, we had just 2% more housing units. And that's across the region. But when we look at areas where they are close to opportunities, we see the housing prices escalate even higher, right? When you have access to jobs at Ohio State, when you have access to education opportunities, transit, those are places where we see those spikes happen quite intensely. Really pricing out a lot of families from those opportunities, really pushing families out into the community, out of the city of Columbus and out into the adjacent counties before they can afford housing. And so when we look at the multitude of tools and policies that we put in place to bring affordability into Columbus, certainly zone-in will be a meaningful contribution, especially along the corridors. But as we looked at the policy of including affordability and expanding that opportunity through our residential tax incentive, it's a really important tool and it's a super responsive tool. And I think one of the things that council has required of us as we continue to evolve that tool is to look at it every 3 years to make sure that it's properly calibrated, that it's giving us what we need. We did a lot of work at the end of last year to really look at how challenging is it to build residential in Central Ohio. And we did a lot of homework and had a lot of information to show that right now, as we're looking at, again, increasing that supply, right? So as we build units in the community, we were down in 2023 compared to what we built in 2022. That's the wrong trajectory. And what we understood is that it was really related to the interest rates and the cost of capital on bringing new projects into the community. So this tool becomes really meaningful to continuing, again, keeping pace like we saw Minneapolis do, watching that growth happen, bringing that housing alongside, and back to where we see those hyper-escalated home prices and rent prices, we're able to bring in those affordability tools, which again, council holds us to make sure that we're calibrating that affordability to go as deep as we can. Certainly can show a lot of that evidence. And I would also call out, when we look at the affordability below that 60%, that's really where we need capital subsidy in a project. And so we work with our affordable housing partners, the $200 million affordable housing bond dollars that were authorized by the Columbus voters in 2022. We take those dollars and add them into projects to deliver that deeply affordable product. We really want to hit the spectrum, right? We want to make sure that we're across all of those different opportunities to bring affordability no matter where you are on an income level in Central Ohio, and making sure that you have access to all our neighborhoods. So when you look at the Columbus housing strategy in total, it really balances the need for enough housing and making sure we're keeping pace with that population growth in a way that our peer cities often didn't do and saw those extraordinary rent and home price increases, but also deploying the tools to make sure that we are accessing those units for both deeply affordable and our middle income residents as well. So it's really across the spectrum. And again, these are tools that we continue to work with council, that they really hold the administration to making sure that we're calibrating those tools appropriately, responding to the market challenges that we have, and really making sure that we have that full spectrum of housing for all our residents in all our neighborhoods.
So two additional responses. So Ms. Palmer from Building and Zoning Services, could you just speak to, I think one of our resident talked about a number of things from like site plan compliance, stream restoration, these kinds of things. Does zone-in change anything as Building and Zoning Services approaches reviewing site plans, issuing building permits? I think one of the things I've said a lot, like zone-in doesn't let people just build whatever they want, wherever they want, whenever they want. We still have a bureaucracy in place that reviews these projects, and I wonder if you could speak to whether or not this changes any of that.
Yes, exactly. The process to review development will not change. There's still site compliance that will be required. So the same protections that are in place currently right now for our flood zones, for our stream corridor protection zones, that comes down largely from Ohio EPA that the city administers, that is still in place. So those safeguards are still there. That is not going to change anything. And in terms of the open space along our corridors, they're generally urban in nature. The current zoning code does not require any open space to be saved for those sites. So the new mixed-use zoning districts actually are requiring open space, which is new. Along the corridors, it's 25 square feet per dwelling unit, and then the larger sites that are at least 10 acres or more, then that's 5% of the site to be open space. That's on top of the dwelling unit requirement, and certainly that is the proposal as it stands right now, and that's what we're looking for is feedback to see if that's the right calibration. But it is a step up from where we are right now, that there is no requirement along those corridors, even in the residential zoning districts, the apartment zoning districts where you have a building lot coverage requirement, a maximum. That space that isn't covered by a building, that isn't required to be landscaped necessarily. That could be actually a parking lot. That doesn't count towards that building lot coverage. So this is an improvement, an incremental improvement, yes. So we enjoy and we want to hear your feedback to see if that is the right calibration for that percentage for additional open space.
Thank you, Ms. Palmer. I know, Assistant Director, I don't know if you have anything to add.
I just also say that one of the things that we've recognized as a part of this work with respect to climate is that there's a benefit in focusing development in these key areas where we have resources where we can support transit, and today it's difficult to do that in the way we want, and so that's a real benefit in terms of climate impact is to be using less ground, candidly, and supporting transit. So I appreciate Ms. Palmer's response, because as she said, many of these areas don't have even the requirements that we're talking about today. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Director. Again, our next speaker is Mr. Ben Keith, and after him we will have Mr. Cephas Pearson.
All right. Well, good evening. Thank you, Commissioner, council members, and city staff. My name is Ben Keith. I'm the Zoning Committee Chair for North Linden. I am also a Commissioner on the North Linden Area Commission. And I have to say, we do need this zoning code. We need the affordable housing that will come from massively increasing our housing production. We need sustainable, reliable transit, which will come from the Link Us initiative, bringing better CODA services in the next 5 years, whose riders will come from people who don't need to own a car to get around town. We need communities with stores, groceries, and services within walking distance, which comes by building more residences to provide more customers to keep these stores open. And by making it possible to walk, bike, and bus to get around, there will be fewer cars on the road, less traffic blocking the people who do in fact need to drive. But this zoning code cannot do everything. So many things are beyond the scope of the zoning code. Building code and fire code are part of that, but I want to touch on something that was mentioned earlier this evening. We're proposing to add tens of thousands of new residents on these corridors. Every one of these corridors is also on Columbus Vision Zero's high injury network. We need to fix that. Now, I rode my bike here today. I had to cross Cleveland Avenue. Columbus has the Walk Safe on Cleveland program, which is supposed to reduce and prevent the high numbers of deaths and injuries that come from drivers speeding on that arterial road. As part of this program at 18th Avenue, instead of installing a light or painting a crosswalk or even putting up signs to tell drivers to look out for pedestrians, the city of Columbus put up signs telling pedestrians to look both ways. 3 pedestrians have been injured at that intersection in the last 5 years, according to ODOT, and all Columbus does is tell pedestrians to look out. Now, there is a traffic signal at 17th in Cleveland. I crossed the Cleveland Avenue at that traffic light. But if I was in a wheelchair, that wouldn't work, because Cleveland Avenue's sidewalks have too many utility poles and signs planted in the middle of the sidewalk, leaving no space for wheelchairs or strollers to move. You can't get to 17th Avenue from 18th Avenue if you're in a wheelchair. So are residents supposed to roll in the street on a 35-mile-an-hour road where drivers often go 45? Columbus has a Vision Zero plan with certain goals by 2028, but we're not making much progress on it. And city staff have said that if we pass this zoning code update this year, we'll start seeing new housing coming online by 2027. Residents of North Linden have been asking Columbus to lower speeds on Cleveland Avenue for decades. We need the streets to be safe by the time residents move in. Now, I'm not asking the city to hold off on the zoning code update until the streets are safe. We cannot delay passing this zoning code update or building more housing. If we delay, the city's housing will become unaffordable, even more unaffordable than it currently is. But at the same time, we need to make the streets safe for people who walk and bike and take the bus. The current strategies and proposals aren't enough. And at the same time as it passes this zoning code update, what can city council do to force the city of Columbus to make our neighborhood streets safer? That's my question.
Thank you, Mr. Keith. And those comments, I think, are incredibly important when we're talking about trying to identify key areas of the city to encourage growth. Obviously, I think you have been an area commissioner long enough to see our current code allows sort of sprawl, which makes infrastructure investments, particularly around transit and safety, very, very difficult when you have a city that's 220 plus square miles. Having more dense and actually telling people we want to see more housing, more development in these specific areas will allow us to be more concentrated with those capital investments, to your point, to finally actually address many of the things that so many advocates in our community have actually articulated. So, you know, to your point, we can't delay on this topic, but the capital budget that comes out on an annual basis will allow us to really use this as a lens to look at those kind of investments. So I think it's a very fair critique and comment, one of which I think this council takes seriously. Next speaker come before council is Mr. Cephas Pearson, and then we have Mr. Lawndale Towns Sr.
First, Cephas Pearson, TPT Developments. Great to be here tonight. So many beautiful faces. First, I'd like to begin by saying I am on here as a small developer, small-scale developer, which I believe the cohorts of small developers within Franklin County, we are the backbone of development in a lot of ways. I'm just here to implore council to continue the path with the zone in, excuse me, because as smaller developers developing on infill lots, the financial burden that we face often is huge. Just being able to read through the different policy changes that will take place will alleviate a heavy burden, you know, on smaller developers, specifically from a time standpoint. As stated earlier, a lot of the things that our area commissions are dealing with, they could be doing, you know, dealing with greater and more pressing topics than some of the kind of routine variances that may come into place. And honestly, on our side, it becomes very cumbersome from a times perspective, and we all know that time is money. So I just would implore council to keep going. And I do want to take one moment to say this. I hope that the residents of Columbus understand that there are a group of developers that when we sit down, not every time does everything align. Your interests and our interests may not align in every single case, but I can tell you with 100% certainty that in every project, in every meeting, we are addressing, like, what does this do to the neighborhood? How will the residents feel? Because I get it, sometimes the developer gets looked at as the bad guy. You're only in it for but that's not true. And I have to share this one last part. As a developer, I'm also an extreme, everybody has a story, I'm not gonna share that. I'm an extreme advocate for affordable housing, 70% AMI or less. When you go, take the time. One speaker said, take the time to go downtown to the zone-in office and look at that. Take the time to go into a rental seminar where they're bringing in tenants that are looking for housing. These are quality people, just like you and I, and they just need an opportunity to have a quality, affordable space over their heads. So it's important, and they happen. Section 8 has them. You know, different community groups are having these different events, sponsoring, trying to get tenants in the home. So it's not always just about dollars and cents. So I just want to implore the council to continue to move forward and for all of us to look at the totality of the situation and not just only our own interests.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. Again, next speaker to come before council is Mr. Londale Towns Sr. After Mr. Towns, we will have Maria Kane Jeffers.
I am because we are, and we are because I am. Greeting and welcome to Linden, everyone. My name is Londale Towns Sr., and I am a Linden resident, born and raised, and it does my heart great joy to see the city council and a lot of brilliant minds and lovers of the city here in Columbus, fellowshipping here in Linden. My comment is more so to the people we love the most. It's time. Columbus, we have been living in the Flintstone age for quite some time. And I could imagine when Fred Flintstone meet the Jetsons, and I could imagine him having a hard time computing what's going on. Where's my car? I can use my feet. Where's my dinosaur to open up my can? I will come with full optimism. The Jetson mentality is here in Columbus. Growth is a beautiful thing. But we must be honest, Columbus, how did we get here? I offer you the term stewardship. Whatever we don't take care of will be taken from you. Columbus, we have not done a great job of stewarding our great city. So now we have people coming in and making decisions for us. But the good thing about these decision makers is that they're taking what we need and what we desire into fruition. So I challenge us Columbus citizens, are we going to sit here with our hands in our lap and be victims of this change? Or are we going to rise and develop and encourage and try to be a change agent? Under the leadership of our president, I'm confident, Columbus, it's going to be scary. But out of this opportunity, we have a greater opportunity to do things that we haven't done in a while. And that's band together. The city's changing, our mentalities is changing. But most importantly, this growth, Brother Remy, is going to be beautiful. Is it going to be scary in the process? We may have those fears. But I encourage y'all to continue to read, continue to come out and voice your opinions. We're going to get a lot of things right. But with growth, we know some things we might get wrong as well. We can weather this storm. We will weather this storm. Look, y'all came to Linden. So for that, I am grateful. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker come for our council is Maria Kane Jeffers. After Ms. Jeffers, we have Ms. Monica Tuttle.
Good evening. I'm coming here twofold, maybe threefold. My parents and I, we are property owners on the east side. And you tripled my property tax on this last 3-year thing was absurd. I have to raise my rent. I have to. And even with Section 8 and Community Housing Plus, they won't allow them to have enough rent money for me to rent to them. That's not affordable. And I don't mean I want low income. I get it. But 16% increase doesn't reflect the property taxes. So I'm wanting to know, how is that going to be controlled? How are you going to control this triple property tax?
And just like a follow-up question, hi, I'm Micah, this is my auntie. In terms of the increase in property taxes, for my grandmother, my parents, my aunts, they own property and have been property owners in the Near East Side for decades and decades, but they're still experiencing the same amount of like the same tax hikes as every other person who's new to the neighborhood. So for them to continue to provide affordable rents, like Kane Properties is probably the most affordable rents you can probably find in the Near East Side. How, like, is there any type of policy that is going to protect them going forward so we can continue to provide affordable, or I would even say low income rent to be more clear in terms of the use of the words? And yeah, what is the approach to protect like long-term landowners on the Near East Side or in Columbus in general, and like what can folks expect even beyond Zone N to address this specific housing problem?
Yeah, so, well, I'm sorry, ma'am.
No.
Do you have anything else?
Yes, I have
Yep.
another one. I live on Woodland Avenue. When you go by the corridors and whatnot, and I saw that you had Columbus City Schools as something that you will not touch or bother, it'll remain the same. Do you give the same protection for charter schools?
So I'm going to have the department answer that question directly, and then I have a comment regarding the tax issue, and then I'm going to throw it to Assistant Director on that. So, Mr. Wheeler, do you want to comment on the charter school, whether or not they were included or not?
Yeah, the school exception is focused on public schools, so publicly owned school sites.
But again, the change of zoning designation would not disturb the use of a community school in any way?
No, that would remain the case.
Okay. So one comment, and then I'm going to throw it to Ms. Prosser to see how much of this I get wrong. So what you're talking about with regard to the property tax increases, everyone in this room groaned when they opened up that envelope this past year, right? That is also when we talk about displacement, that is not only for property owners themselves, but also landlords like yourself that are saying, how do I keep a long-term tenant while also being able to afford to pay your bills as expenses as a landlord, right? And those property tax increases are a direct result of that supply and demand equation being out of whack, right? So the reason that those property values skyrocketed is because we have not produced enough supply, which makes every property in this community more valuable, which means that is then translated into your property taxes. The only way to slow down increased valuations is for there to be more housing, i.e. it's less valuable. Now, again, when we talk about, we don't want to say, I want my housing prices to go down, right? We all want to recoup that investment, at some point that families have made into a home. But we want to see those property values go up 2%, 3%, 4%, right? We don't want to see 16% jumps, because that's what leads to a family, a senior citizen, not being able to afford that house anymore, who's on a particular fixed income. And that is a direct result of us building fewer houses, fewer housing units than our market needs, which means that whether again it's owner occupied or whether it's a rental property, means that is going to translate out back into the marketplace. And that is something when we talk about one of the main reasons for this initiative to go from potential 6,000 housing units being built on one of these properties to 88,000, that is one of the explicit goals, is to increase that supply, not only for people to have roofs over their heads, but also to help, again, stabilize that marketplace, which again, should help to, again, stabilize those property valuations, get them back down where folks can absorb a 2 or 3 or 4% increase versus having a 15 or 16 or 70% jump that it's very, very difficult for anyone to afford, let alone a senior on fixed income. And I want to throw it to Director Prosser to see if she has any follow-up on that.
And the only thing I would add is, as we think about our other partners in this space, and we're pretty limited at the City of Columbus as to how we can address property taxes. It's really defined by the state. And recently, the State Senate went through a process and issued a report, the Senate Select Committee on Housing, and really looked at, around the state, what were the challenges. And they heard from a lot of homeowners around property tax. And I think what they're looking at is what could be the solutions at the state level to help enable us at the city to make those changes and to address those concerns, while also addressing the supply side so we alleviate that pressure, which Kevin mentioned during his presentation, on our neighborhoods by pulling that density to the corridors, alleviating that pressure, but also working with our partners at the state so that we have some tools that we can deploy and work with council to find some solutions for homeowners in our community and for landlords as well, and making sure that that's not reflected in the rents that they need to charge to keep those buildings.
Okay, but I have another question. Going back to the charter schools. Woodland Park Neighborhood Association has the Mansion Day School. Lot of land on Long and Woodland. Part of the parcels were up for sale. I understand they were going to build, I don't know, how tall was it built? 6 condos. How tall? No, just 6 condos. Not a whole bunch of condos right in front of Mansion Day School. I think it's kindergarten or 8th grade. It's a bottleneck getting the kids in and out. And to add, I think it was 5-story, 16 stories. Sorry, Mom. So I'm wondering, is there an eminent domain that you're going to do? Where is safety in that?
Can I speak on that one? So,
yeah.
I used to live on Long in Woodland, and my nephew went to Mansion Day School. This does not change mansions, anything for mansion zoning. So whatever the process they would have to go to now, whatever the area commission has in terms of protection for mansion still applies regardless, since this is not a site that was included in the zoning rewrite.
Okay, so is there anything for historical homes or anything like that? Is there a safeguard on that?
So the requirements for historical commissions will remain in place. So if the property is within one of the historical districts, all those requirements currently apply. I know, Assistant Director, if you want to speak to anything more on that, potentially properties that are outside of one of those districts.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we do recognize, again, is that in some of these older commercial corridors, you have vacant buildings that are difficult to reuse. And they have barriers in terms of zoning. They don't have parking, they can't provide it. Their setbacks don't match what the code requires. There are some areas of East Main Street, for instance, that were built as commercial areas that got rezoned, I don't know when, I can't remember, and have residential zoning. So, you find a shop front that, ironically, they need a variance to be able to have a business. And so I think one of the things that we're hoping is that some of these changes will allow the reuse of some of these buildings, because that's the number one way of protecting older buildings, is having them actively used.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I
All right,
promise.
I'm going to limit you one last one because we got, I think, about another 15 people to go.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I had myself on the list, but I'll just go now. Just from a more broader perspective, I understand that there's a difference between zoning policy and zoning code and then development standards. So for me, I have less qualms with phase 1 of Zone In, and I called Mark and we chatted about this. He's awesome. But in terms of the history of Near East Side, we know the history. Near East Side residents, especially Black residents who came here like in Great Migration, we've seen the effects of redlining, then the construction of I-71, I-70, urban renewal that displaced more Black families, and then like literally went to the library yesterday and looked and seen like the federal funded Model Cities program. Every single housing project there failed that was sponsored. Amazing, because the neighborhood review boards, which are now the area commissions, were established through the Model Cities program, which is an amazing gain, especially in like the 90s. But like, I'm just, and I voiced these concerns before, but is there any, in like phase 2 and phase 3 and like the governance and the administration phases of Zone In, is there flexibility to also codify community voice? Because the city of Columbus has never successfully like been able to first of all, conduct a community needs assessment and have development be informed by its residents. And even like I'm hearing like a lot of folks like comment on the zoning approach about adding more capacity for housing for people who are coming to Columbus, but that doesn't address like the people that are from the Near East Side who have been displaced. And like as someone who like I owned and bought a house on the south of Maine, like right behind the silos, I love mixed use development. Like I'm an incoming Master City Planning student at MIT, so I give the shits. I understand mixed use development promotes walkability, healthier living, but the thing that is consistently missing from every single zoning planning policy pushed by the city is fostering community-led development. So I'm just asking, and I understand there's going to be different sessions to talk about different topics, but I am really pressing on the fact that the big difference, if we want to have these big like goals and lofty goals and to promote healthier living here in the city, we need to figure out how we can codify that specifically so it's not just, oh, what does the Department of Development feel like doing? I went to the Zone-In Gallery. It's absolutely amazing. I definitely encourage everyone to go. But I think that sometimes like this technocratic, we like brought in a consulting firm to give us these architectural designs. That is void of community voice, and we need a way to be able to hold developers to a higher standard. There was another woman here earlier who was talking about like, if you don't know what zoning is, like, you don't know what's going on. First of all, that makes a lot of assumptions about people's literacy, access to information, transportation, all of those things. And I feel like none of these people know, like, that is a big blind spot that I feel like we need to, like, front and center tackle community voice first. This is tangential, I'm sorry.
So thank you. I'm going to try and keep us rolling because we do have a number of folks. So if you could wrap up.
I would love to hear your response and like reflections and what can we expect on phase 2 and phase 3 of Zone In?
Yeah, no, so, and again, I think this goes towards larger discussion. So again, when we talk about phase 1 is really that laser focused on that, 4 or 5% of the city on those transit corridors. And I think when Assistant Director Wheeler talks about like the capacity of going from 6,000 units to 88,000 potential units, and again, the zoning districts that have been proposed are specific to that type of development, I think there's an expectation, there's certainly a council expectation that we move to a phase 2 at some point, which would be the rest of the city. That phase looks probably radically different than what we're at here today. Because again, as we've mentioned here today, part of the point of phase 1 is to take some of the development pressures off of those neighborhoods, right? So you don't have
and I support that.
Yeah, so you don't have to see such larger developments within those areas, again, to try and keep pace with some of the housing pressures that we have. I think the number of things you mentioned should be things that both council and I think the administration consider, and I think very thoughtfully as we move towards those. And I want to make sure that you have a conversation with Assistant Director Wheeler at some point, because there's several things in there that I think need to be imparted as we think about this. But phase 1, again, our comment period runs through this June. My expectation is to likely bring a version of this legislation to a vote this summer, and then we will head into phase 2. And I don't know how long that will take. But because we will be moving towards moving to the rest of the city, everyone's neighborhood, that will look different. And the expectation of council and the administration will have to be different based upon, I think, a number of the things that you mentioned, whether it's design standards or whether community engagement or otherwise, because we're talking about the future of the city, and nothing is more personal to anyone than their neighborhood, their block, their house. Right? And I think that is the kind of thing that we all need to be very thoughtful of. But we will move towards that after this piece of legislation is considered by council.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Monica Tuttle, and then after Ms. Tuttle, we have Mr. John Clark.
Hi, good
And again, I'm sorry, Monica, to cut you off. I am going to ask if folks could try to keep to 3 minutes if possible, since we are getting a little bit later. But again, Midwestern politeness, so I'm not going to cut anybody off.
Yeah, this is what radical listening looked like. We had to tell the recreation center to stay open later than 8 o'clock, which it closed, but we will be here.
So we ain't closing the door. So I'm not going anywhere. But Ms. Tuttle.
First off, thank you for being here. Thank you for having these meetings. I'm so excited to see this many people here, but I still don't think we're reaching enough people.
I agree.
One thing I would love to see is maybe not every parcel, I know there's 13,000 of them, but zoning signs on some of these parcels saying, hey, we're in the Link Us Phase 1. It's not just neighbors, it's not just people on the corridors that need that postcard to come by mail. I am constantly surprised by the number of people who come up to me and are not aware of Zone In at all. They've never heard of it. They don't know anything about it. And that breaks my heart because I think that it is important to have community involvement. I do as much outreach as I can personally just to make people aware, encourage people to come to the gallery. So I would strongly suggest, or even at bus stops, some place where people who are passing that are going to be on these corridors and passing by can visualize. They can see the website, there can be a QR code, something to get that out there. And then I would also, I think there's a lot of lofty goals that are embraced by this plan, but I think we also need to consider the unintended consequences. And some of the things that we worry about, I live in Northwest Columbus, we have a lot of older buildings, we have older infrastructure, but we have older buildings. And as a result, we have naturally occurring affordable housing and naturally occurring affordable retail and commercial space. And we are petrified that we are going to lose that developers are going to come in with these, I don't want to say relaxed standards, but with this ability to utilize more of the space. They're going to rip down existing buildings and they're going to build, and with new buildings comes higher rents. So I understand that there's things in the proposal that if you make an enlargement that's less than 25%, you stay under Title 33, but maybe something that encourages reuse of buildings. It doesn't necessarily have to do with the zoning, but how can we encourage developers to reuse the existing? What I talk about with my constituents, and then I can get more people on board with, is infill over upfill. We would love to see some of those parking lots filled in with housing, but we're afraid. We are terrified. All of the new apartment buildings that have come into our area in the last 6 years are not affordable. Whether you call it affordable, whether you call it sustainable, everyone should be paying less than 30% of their income. I don't care if you make $8 million or $80,000 or $8,000. And we're not seeing that in our area. So we commend this move towards affordable housing. The other thing, just really quickly, and I'm sorry, we do need some restrictions. We agree with being proactive, but there are things that we can't foresee. And so we do need some guardrails. One of the big things we're seeing with graphics is these vinyls on the windows, which was never contemplated. We do need something, changeable copy, never contemplated. Obviously, those are graphics issues, but we don't know what's to come in the next 70 years. And so limiting that in some way, and also encouraging the community involvement. I understand that variances and rezonings take a tremendous amount of time from a lot of city staff. Most of the people who work on it in the neighborhood are volunteers, but we love having that input. We love hearing what is coming and being able to say, you know what, we really don't want you to put more red maples there. We want these other trees. Which brings me to the last thing, trees. There's not enough about the trees in the code. We don't want all the existing trees to get cut down and be replaced with deciduous 2-inch diameter. That's not sufficient. That is going to be a huge hit to our canopy cover. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tuttle. So a couple things. So one, a couple of the notification ideas. Thank you. I think we're probably going to talk about some of those. So those are some great ideas. I do want to pause and see. So one, the city just went through its first phase of the tree preservation ordinance, which was on, again, the right-of-way. There is more to come on sort of tree preservation as it exists, potentially outside of that.
On private property too?
And then that is something that's going to be sort of figured out as it moves through sort of the development process. So I can't speak directly to what exactly that looks like right now. But again, from a tree canopy standpoint, we know we don't have enough. We know we need more. And again, if we're encouraging more development, we need to be thoughtful around that. And I don't know if Assistant Director Wheeler, if you had any response to any of the comments.
Just that I think one of the things that I would remind folks is that this will be iterative. It will not happen all at once. And that is important because it allows the market time to adjust. And it allows retailers the time to adjust as well. With respect to trees, you know, I would just reiterate Chair Dorans' comment about the street tree plan and the city's efforts to protect trees and do a you know, increased emphasis on right-of-way requirements and emphasis that this code will place on landscaping that we don't have in a lot of corridor sections now. Aaron, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about evolving market and its implications for retail, but that's just one of the things that happens as part of this as well.
Yeah, and you know, kind of piggybacking on the idea of how the change will happen, right? The ability to modernize the zoning code is really meaningful, and we talk about those 88,000 units. These things will happen over time, right? There's a lot of other challenges to bringing new developments into our community that those folks are going to have to navigate. And so this will be a change across time. And when we think about those 88,000 units spread across those 143 miles of corridors, we'll see those changes happen slowly. But as we think about what benefits we get from adding housing along the corridors and thinking about the support for our small businesses, and we think about some of the advantages that we have along the corridors when we add new folks into the community, and I think that's where focusing on the corridors really helps support some of those other values and important things we have around supporting our small businesses, having great places to go, having access to amenities. Those are all the things that make a really strong neighborhood. But we need folks that will be there and be those customers. And so I think as we think about the change, it really will be iterative and over time. It won't be a rapid change because, again, there's a lot of other headwinds up against new development right now that is going to naturally slow it and kind of respond to that market across the time over the next bunch of years as we modernize the code.
I would also say this 88,000 number we keep hearing is a very aspirational number. There's nothing that actually requires housing on any of these parcels.
Correct.
Or actually encourages housing on any of these parcels. Every single parcel, although it can be mixed use, there's nothing that requires that it be a mix of use or that it be other than retail or commercial.
Yeah.
So I would encourage, I know sub-districts were set aside to be something different, but maybe sub-districts are identified parcels that require a certain percentage of development being dedicated to housing.
Yeah, so to that point, so one, most of these parcels are limited to commercial zonings right now. So the very fact we're opening them up to residential, which I know you know I'm more saying for the folks that may be watching right now, that again is in fact encouraging that in the sense of we're removing those prescriptive restrictions and saying you can't do housing there. We're saying you can do housing there in addition to other things as well, right? So I think that removes some of that barrier in which we're trying to directly encourage that sort of development. The one thing I will leave you with, Ms. Tuttle, is that to the point of sort of unintended consequences. This is phase one. We have tried to learn from what other cities have done to incorporate into this proposal. We're going to learn from ourselves. And, you know, I think a great example of this is the last time the community reinvestment policy came through council. We removed tax incentives for single-family houses unless there was affordability attached to that project, because this council saw that led to drivers of gentrification within many historically black neighborhoods across Columbus. So we took that out. We said if you're going to have an incentive for a single-family house conversion, then it has to have affordability attached to it. That is what I like to say, that we're sort of learning these lessons as we go. We need to learn them as quickly as we possibly can to get out in front of them. So I'm sure there will be things that happen based upon us implementing a version of what has been proposed, and we will learn from that. And you know, I will tell you, as the chair of this committee, we will try to evaluate that, and if changes need to be made, we will make them. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone. Sorry I went over 3 minutes.
Yeah.
No, that was good.
Next speaker to come from council, Mr. John Clark, and then Michael Ojabi. Thank you, sir. I apologize.
Thank you. Mr. Wheeler touched on this earlier. I just am looking for some clarity. A portion of the Livingston Avenue Transportation Corridor overlaps the German Village Historic District. Will the city commit to allowing the German Village Commission to determine what happens to currently vacant property where this overlap occurs?
So I think this is the potentially inopportune break for Mr. Wheeler. So my understanding of how this works, so that the requirements of the commission still apply. They are not disturbed. So certificate of appropriateness, everything that flow through that will continue to apply. The only change will be those zoning designations. So it's not limiting or not restricting the ability for that commission to have the powers it currently has.
Well, that's where my confusion comes in because of the overlap, the transportation corridor overlapping with the historic district. Could we take that transportation corridor out of the German Village Historic District so that there's no confusion there?
I don't have an answer for you, but this is a great question, a very specific one, and thank you for bringing a very specific question. I'm going to make sure we've got your contact information, that I'm going to connect you with Assistant Director Wheeler to get that question answered, or at least to make sure that comment is landing in the spot where we can figure out what we want to do with it.
Maybe Mr. Wheeler could speak to my question now.
So, Assistant Director, we had a very specific question about the Livingston Avenue corridor as it overlaps with the German Village Commission. So do you want to ask the question again really quickly so that...
Yes, and we've spoken about this once before, and I just am looking for some clarity. Will the city commit to allowing the German Village Commission to determine what happens to any currently vacant property where the overlap occurs?
So, I'm sorry, catching up with you, but we have talked about this, and the German Village Commission's authority to review proposals and approve them through the Certificate of Appropriateness process will remain intact, even if the property is part of one of the new zone-in, if this proceeds and it's one of the new zone-in parcels. That will continue to be the case.
So there will be no effect of the new zoning plan on the historic districts whatsoever?
I'm not saying that. The base zoning changes. There is base zoning under German Village today. Everything is zoned something, so every piece of property is zoned something. The zoning will be updated along the corridor. So right now, a project needs both German Village Commission approval and it needs to comply with zoning. Those two things will continue to be the case. The zoning will be changed, however.
All right. Because we had a hotel developer a few years ago propose a hotel for that property, and he wanted zero parking. He offered zero parking. And that was something that the German Village Commission said we cannot accept. You're not going to be able to park enough cars for 150 rooms on our streets, on High Street, in the Brewery District. But what I'm hearing now about the parking confuses me as it relates to this overlap. Might the commission say no, but then the new zoning plan, which calls for developers to come up with their own parking plans, might there be a discrepancy there?
I think this is an area where we have to talk about what the German Village Commission's guidelines are and what is the basis of making decisions for the commission today.
So the guidelines will be followed, will be respected?
That will be our expectation, is that the guidelines will continue to be used by the commission in reviewing projects, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
Good evening, everyone. It's getting pretty late, so I'll be pretty quick. I'm Michael. I'm from outside of 270 in Columbus, around New Albany, Gahanna. I must say I'm very, very impressed with the City Council taking the initiative to implement zoning reform. It's very long overdue, and it makes me proud to be an Ohioan because all major 3Cs, Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland, are all doing something to make their cities more walkable and livable for everyone. So thank you so much to the City Council. And I just wanted to bring up a few concerns. I know, I understand this is phase 1 of the city zoning code, but I noticed that on Morse Road, leading all the way to New Albany, there isn't really any major changes. So I was wondering if you guys are taking a look at that area And for like the residential neighborhoods that are not covered along the major corridors, will there be any like implementation of like more housing like on a single family lot, possibly maybe corner stores, and what are your guys' plan in regards to making the city more bikeable and walkable friendly? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So on that particular topic around bikeable, walkable, et cetera, I think that's going to be a little bit more from our second hearing that's revolving around like parking and transit. So there'll be more information on that. But one, there is a plan underway. A new bike plan is coming through the Department of Public Service right now. There's a number of multimodal investments that are happening across the city right now, both in pilot phase and expanded phase. I did want to pause. So again, we're here talking about phase one, so I don't want to spend too much time speculating about what phase two could look like.
Right.
But as I said earlier, I think the expectation of council is that once we leave the corridors and potentially have a phase two that evaluates the rest of the city, there's going to be a different approach in which, because there's going to need to be. Right, so I don't quite know what that looks like today, but I've got the phase one sort of focused in front of us right now.
Awesome. And is there by any chance Link Us, like maybe open house meeting? Never really. I tried doing some research, but I never really saw that there was a Link Us community engagement.
I'm going to let the council president chat about that for just a second.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I love Link Us, and I appreciate you asking that question. Link Us and Zone In go hand in hand. Really, one does not work without the other, and so it's a comprehensive growth plan. We at council are really focused right now on Zone In because we know we have to solicit so much information just to get us to a potential July vote. Obviously, as you know, we are bringing. It is my expectation that CODA will vote the next week or so to put Link Us on the ballot for this November. So there will be a broad community conversation, i.e. campaign, around Link Us, where we want to actually mimic some of the things that we're learning about how to engage people now. We like the Zone In gallery, so imagine a Link Us gallery where folks can come in or go into a bus and have that experience as you go around town. My aide, John Tanous in the back, who is yawning and tired and eating snacks out of the vending machine, is a great person to talk to about Link Us and how you can get engaged. But we would love to have you engaged on Link Us.
The last thing I'll say on that topic in particular before I let Councilmember Dayakauer is that every Zone In corridor every Link Us corridor is a zoning corridor. So when we talk about these things layering on top of one another, that is very intentional when we talk about bringing more reliable, better mass transit, again, as it relates to having transit options, but also less reliance on parking single occupancy vehicles. That's very, very intentional. Councilmember?
If you're available this Thursday at 1 o'clock, I'm actually having a special Link Us presentation. It's actually for leadership in the United Methodist Church, but I'll welcome you to come Thursday, 1 o'clock. North Broadway United Methodist Church.
Great plug. The next speaker to come for our council is Mr. Troy Shaw, and after Mr. Shaw, we will have Mr. Alfonso Hooper.
To Council President, to council members, and to staff, to Columbus members, we're so glad that you've invited us to speak and to ask questions. I want to say first off that I really like this city council. I've known council members ever since I was a little boy, and to be able to come and speak and be heard is a wonderful thing. I want to champion our president because I've noticed that he has been a listener from the day that he arrived on council, and I appreciate that. He even listens to school children and does legislation because of it, and so I appreciate that. Some 4 years ago, Mr. Wheeler and Mark, I'm so sorry, your last name still escapes me, came to my house in Virginia via Zoom, and Ms. Brown, our councilwoman Brown that's gone, and we talked about Walnut Creek. Now, a lot of people don't understand Walnut Creek because they always want to call it the Eastland Mall Corridor. But Walnut Creek is a real community that is bordered at the north by 70, at the south by our park and Walnut Creek, at the west by No Bixby, and at the east by Courtright. And oftentimes, things are pulled one way or they're pulled the other, but never really in our community. I pastor the Liberty Hill Church, which is right pretty much at the corner of Hamilton and Refugee Road. So we are directly in this plan, directly in the plan, not around the plan and all of that. We're in the plan. And I am excited because this is precisely what we ask for. I'm not talking about other parts of the city. I'm talking about our part of the city. And we are glad that you have answered. 350 acres of urban desert. We've never complained when somebody brought something to us. We've only complained when things have died in our community. Our Kroger left, our Big Bear left, our mall left, our everything left. And so there we are in an urban desert, 350 acres. Our neighborhood, our community is nearly 80 acres larger than the campus of The Ohio State University. We have everything ready for a walkable community that has housing and medical and schools and all of that, and we've never complained when you bring us something. Ms. Brown said, hey, we're gonna bring you some money, we're gonna do a park over there by the mall. Thank you. We don't come to complain. We come to say thank you. We don't have a lot of residents. Look at the area, 350 acres, mostly apartments, but Columbus is our major stakeholder. You own 2 large parks. You own the waterway that goes all the way around this beautiful community. You own most of Groves Road. Come to Walnut Creek because we need people and residents and life at Walnut Creek. And so I'm so glad that finally those big parking lots at the mall and the big parking lots in front of Kroger and the big parking lots in front of Big Bear can finally be utilized for people. So thank you. I have 2 questions. My first question is with regards to how do we tear it down? I was very sad a few years ago when there was a shooting in a supermarket. And they said, because we just built the supermarket, we have to use it. There were so many people killed in that supermarket. I could not imagine going back to the supermarket where my grandmother, my aunt, my family were killed. So I thought, why can't we tear it down? Because we didn't think about how to tear it down. So let's think also in the code what it looks like when those buildings have to come back down. So that when we look at a place like the Walnut Creek neighborhood where we have 350 acres of urban desert, why did that happen? When the mall left, what was the plan that said this is what can happen next? When we think about building a building, how many years does that building have in terms of its life? And when we have to tear it down, how easy is that to tear down? How sustainable is our building? And then my second question is, with all of our planning, how many social scientists have we had to look at the plan? When you talk about building and facade, color, whatever that is, what have our social scientists said about that? Our roadways, even the distance between one traffic light and the next should be looked at by social science. Because there are questions and data that should be collected so that we understand what our neighborhoods look like also affect our mental health. Okay? So I think that the plan should also not just think about our wonderful engineers and all of that, but also think about our mental health and what the space looks like ultimately with regards to social science and with regards to psychology and all of those kind of things. So I think the plan should at least be reviewed by some folks who are thinking about that, because our city needs spaces that are also conducive to our mental health. We can see that in the Short North and other places right now where violence and things like that. We know that the broken window effect and architecture and things like that can actually bring about a change in behaviors. So let's think about that also. And that's all. But again, thank you very much. We're so glad in the corridor, because the Liberty Hill Church, I should say, is a stakeholder, I think.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Assistant Director Wheeler, I don't know if you want to respond now or follow up with Mr. Shaw after.
If I could follow up.
Yep, thanks. Again, the next speaker to come before council, Mr. Alfonso Hooper, and after Mr. Hooper, we will have Ms. Esther Flores.
Good evening, City Council President Shannon and all the other councilmen and the business people. I want to thank you all for coming to the community. That really is nice. I think we enjoy our councilmen when they come home to speak to us right at home. What I come here for today, I just wanted to know from the councilman, is this zoning change, and did you realize how long it was going to take? I've been on the North Central Area Commission for 40 plus years, and also in Civic Association for 40 plus years. Do you think this is normal to understand this overnight? Do you think something like this shouldn't be put on the ballot where we could vote on it to give us time to, I know we need housing, because I was a recipient of affordable housing. I raised 4 kids in affordable housing in Brittany Hills, and it was the best federal government affordable housing that was very reasonable that you could get. And it made it possible for me to own a single family housing. And it was great. And I know we need a lot more than my 412 neighborhood had. We need a lot. And I want to thank you all for standing up for affordable housing. But in the other end, how do we understand this zoning, and is it going to really be effective for our understanding just by putting the place down at 141? How long do you think this is going to take for our area commissions to understand it and for us to really understand the effect of it? I know we need zoning. Is this going to affect the developers to hurry up and build? Is this going to affect the developers to just be in charge, so to speak, just hurry up and build the houses because we got to get this housing issue solved? And I understand that issue. But you think, how long is this going to come in effect? Because they just brought a 300-page book to North Central here about a month ago. And it was already kind of like laid out of these steps. 300 pages it was a big notebook. How is it possible for us as area commissioners to even get into that? I know that y'all got the lawyers and all of the people that work with you all, but do the neighborhood get these resources for we can kind of understand it? Or do we just say, well, we need housing and we just got to go on and understand it the best we can? How's it going to affect seniors? How's it going to affect our families? And what is these corridors? Because we on the 5th Avenue corridor in North Central, and also Sunbury Road. Because we just had an issue about building a high rise in our community. And the city council passed it because we need housing. But that 4-story building versus our houses that is normal was just unreasonable to the neighborhood that I've been there 54 years. Do you know what a 5-story building would look like across from our lovely Valley Dale and scenic Sunbury Road? It just, to me, it's unreasonable, but I know we need housing. But what is the consideration for that corridor, going through the eastern corridor? How is Sunbury Road going to be affected where I live?
So I'm going to pause there and see, is that portion in phase 1, Assistant Director?
No, this phase of Zone N is restricted, is focused on, it does include 5th Avenue and the intersection with Sunbury, and it includes, as you move east, 5th in the Cassidy area, but not Sunbury Road, north or south.
Thank you.
No, it's not part of this.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hooper. And, to your point about how to get the community to understand, like, that's why we're here tonight. That's why we're trying to do as much as possible. We've got folks from the administration that are going out to every area commission. So I get it. You get a 300 a page booklet and say, let's make heads or tails of this. So, I mean, that is why that we've got folks heading out to every area commission, as many civic associations as we can get. That's why that zoning gallery exists. I know, you know, with it, maybe not the most convenient for everyone on the, in the city, but there's free parking there. It's on a bus line. That's why council's doing these hearings. That's why we're trying to get everywhere we can. But to get, you know, everyone to agree on everything in this city, good luck. You know, that's we're trying to do our best to educate the public about what this is and what it isn't before council makes a decision on whether to amend the legislation that's been presented and ultimately to take a vote. So no community engagement process is perfect, but again, from my 5+ years on council, I think this is the most that we have ever tried. And I think there's been a couple suggestions that I've heard here tonight about more things that we can do. And that's going to be something that we're going to take back after this meeting and explore, again, to try and get the word out to more folks. Because, again, we don't want to surprise anyone. We're trying to be as transparent with folks as we possibly can get. But, you know, absent going on knocking at every single door in the city, we're trying to do our best.
And I would love to host. So we've been hosting specific meetings at the zoning gallery. Last week I hosted a meeting with African American leaders. On Saturday I was hosting specific for young professionals from 10 to 2. So I basically live at this gallery now, and so I would welcome the opportunity to host North Central to come down, and we'll have folks available and ask all the questions. This is not one that we haven't updated the zoning code in 70 years, so we're not rushing this. And so we're not rushing this. We're going to take the time. We're going to listen. We want to make sure people understand so that they can give us the appropriate feedback, so then we can act. We do intend to act. We are going to vote on this, but we are going to, in the time, in the periods left, we are going to listen as much as we can, anywhere, everywhere, but specifically zoning gallery. So I'll ask my team to work with you, Mr. Hooper, if you want to do something specific at the zoning gallery.
And the only thing I'll add to that, if anyone who has testified here tonight, watching tonight, you have an idea of a place, a group that you would like somebody from the city to come talk to about this, that will sit and answer questions. I mean, it is 8:39 at night and we ain't going anywhere. So we want everyone to have their questions answered, to make sure that more of our residents are armed with this information, whether they like it or don't like it. And that is certainly the goal of this council. Again, the next speaker to come before council is Ms. Esther Flores. The speaker after that was to be Tiffany White, but I don't think she's here with us any longer. So the speaker after that will be Mr. Duncan Sir.
Hi, City Council folks and building and zoning folks. It's great to be in a place where I've had multiple questions. My name is Esther Flores. I'm a founder of a nonprofit named One Divine Line to Health. I'm also here in Linden and on the west side, and I primarily work with women who are trafficked in our city, with their children and the caregivers, actually, which are the grandmothers or their sisters of the women who see their body as a commodity in order to provide food and housing. I want to talk about this horrible experience that I had with you folks over here. I love my city council people because they've listened, and quarterly I do my best to advocate and just let them know all the crap that I have to deal with. So thanks to the city, we received some funding and we built a 350 square feet multi-purpose room, which was added to our drop-in center. The drop-in center is basically a house. It's a compassionate setting. I'm a clinician by trade. I'm a nurse. This is the Nurses Week. This is why I'm doing my advocacy here, because we make a difference wherever we're at. Because for us, human development precedes economic development. I believe, deep within my heart, we can have human development and economic development and have a fruitful society where our children are protected, where our women are also protected, and we have affordable housing. I worked with Design Group, Edwards Mooney and Moses, Quarter Engineering, and Colby Construction. It took 2.5 years to build a 350 square feet addition. It doesn't take 2.5 years to build those sky rises that I drive through at night to feed the homeless and to feed these women. There was this lousy rule that was thrown to us. The wall facing Sullivan Avenue, if you don't know about Sullivan Avenue, take a drive over there. And I'm behind Uzi Alley's, that's where we're at. We had to build, we had to have 60% of that wall had to have lighting. The women that I work with, we have 2 bathrooms, and they don't like taking their showers. They take their showers, but they actually clothe themselves in the living room. You imagine when the project was completed in February of this year, we were forced to build, this is no joke, 7 feet tall windows, 3 feet wide windows. Not 1, not 2, but 4. Thanks to Brenda Cruz and her gallery, they actually went ahead and added the vinyl covering so that we can see people from the inside, right? But people from the outside can see us at nighttime, and we run clinics. It cost a lot of money. The project itself, just the windows alone, cost us $9,000. Well, it cost the city $9,000. That just doesn't make sense. The issue was, I had to go downtown and talk to some engineers who had no compassion over my clinical background, the fact that I work with traumatized folks that like to live or like to be in enclosed areas with people like myself who they trust. How can you work with a nonprofit that enjoys working here with a population that keeps growing every single year because they can't afford to live in the affordable housing? I work with grandmothers who are living in cars, who are in motels, raising their children. We need to look at people like myself. When we talk to your engineers, have a little compassion, because when that engineer told me, well, this is how the rules are, unless you want to go to the GHAC and have a variance. Of course I didn't want a variance because I'm in a deadline, I have a deadline to build. The dream is there, but I also want to do this here. I don't want to go through all of that. I know the rules are black and white, and they don't consider the gray areas, but we also have to have some form of compassion, because I'm a major proponent for the small home models. I would love to have small home models, or the ADUs, or whatever you want to call them, okay, in our properties. We have several properties. I'm not a developer, but people love giving me properties, and what I do is we help people. We need to make modifications and consider the fact that not everybody that I work with, or a lot of people, don't want those tall apartment complexes because they are triggers. And plus, they take up a lot of resources. If I can build a small home model in one of my safe houses, I would like to do it. Would you guys consider that? Because it's mostly men who are making the decisions. They don't look like a person like me, and I'm talking to them about how their mind perceives tall buildings, or just houses in general that are next to those tall buildings, because it's a trigger for a lot of their mental health issues.
So thank you, Ms. Flores, for being here. So one, I want to apologize. I know you sent me an email, I think last week, that I have not gotten to yet.
Yes.
You are not out of my mind. I've been thinking all week, kicking myself out. I got to get back to you. So one, I want to facilitate a conversation with the Department of Building and Zoning Services over a number of issues you spoke about here tonight, but also in that email. And again, I apologize, I haven't got to you. You were on my mind, but I haven't gotten to you. I think one of the issues you talked about from an accessory dwelling unit standpoint and some of the sort of smaller scale housing, I think that is certainly going to be something that the city is going to look at when we go to phase 2 of this, which will be the rest of the city. And again, when we think about taking pressure off the rest of the city, when we talk about more development within these specific corridors, lower hanging density, but increased density in some of our neighborhoods look like things like accessory dwelling units. They look like things like carriage houses. They look like things like duplexes. Many of the things that were built before we had zoning, right? I lived in a duplex in Italian Village for a decade, whereas if you wanted to build that duplex now, it'd be illegal, right? You'd have to go through all this variance process, right? So I think that is the kind of thing that is certainly this council would like to see on the table when we go to phase 2, and certainly something that we've already talked to our folks at the administration about, which again I think can fill some of those very needed gaps that you're articulating here tonight. I don't know if anyone from the administration wants to speak to any of the specific comments from Ms. Flores.
Well, one thing I would say is that accessory dwelling units, and again, we're only focusing on the corridors in this round, but accessory dwelling units are permitted by right in all the districts. And I think that Sullivan Avenue is a good example of a place where, because you have a lot of existing single family on Sullivan, much of which is zoned commercially today, but will be zoned in a way that permits it by right moving forward, those are the kinds of places where you often will see accessory dwelling units built. So as the council chair, zoning chair mentioned, a lot of ADUs or carriage houses, as folks call them, are the kinds of things that we might talk about and see in the neighborhoods. We have incorporated them in this round as well, to the extent that folks want to do that.
That's good to know.
Thank you. Yeah, and just to let folks know, we have 6 speaker slips remaining. So again, I'm going to try and keep us going here as much as possible. I don't know if everyone's still here. The next speaker to come for council, Mr. Duncan Sir or Sire. Don't see him here. Miss or Micah Kane. That was Micah. Oh, I'm sorry. Great. We're moving quick here. Mr. Brett Sampson. And after Mr. Sampson is Lisa G. Braun.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having this meeting, letting us all come out and give our thoughts. I just want to thank you guys for doing all of this. Probably the only question I'd have is whether or not council has any plans or benchmarks that they want to revisit in future years. I know that best case scenario, this is going to result in about 88K new housing units. I'm wondering if, 3 years down the line, 5 years down the line, it's possible for us to take a look at how we're doing and then possibly make any tweaks, right? Maybe we don't have as much development in certain corridors. Rather than waiting another 70 years to revisit the zoning code, is there any kind of plan, or do you guys have in your minds any kind of benchmarks for what success looks like, at least in the medium term, as opposed to just the long term? That's my big question, but you guys are doing great. The zoning plan's amazing. Please do not give an inch on the elimination of the parking minimums. It's an extraordinary development, and I can't tell you how much it kills me to drive by the Graceland Shopping Plaza or the plazas off Bethel where Micro Center is, and just seeing enormous swaths of land that are just dedicated to these dead lots where water pools and no one is housed and there's no jobs. So please don't give an inch on that. I know it's controversial. I know that's also going to be addressed at the later one, but that's my, you guys are doing great, and yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for those comments. I think when you talk about benchmarking, that's absolutely something that I think both the administration and council is very interested in, particularly as we move towards phase 2 as well. So again, I think I mentioned this earlier, we've learned lessons from other cities already that we're implementing in this phase. We're going to learn lessons from ourselves. And I think, certainly having a director of housing at the city now, we have somebody who's centrally focused on watching what market conditions are. And I think Assistant Director Wheeler talked about when they made some changes in other parts of the city a number of years ago, really watching to see if the market responded in the way they intended. We're going to be laser focused on seeing how the market responds to this in order to bring more housing sort of online in an appropriate way across the city. So that is a great point, thinking about it from a benchmarking standpoint, actually be able to report back out to the public, but this is something that from a housing strategy standpoint, I know Assistant Director Prosser is very, very interested in making sure that we're holding ourselves accountable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is Miss Lisa, oh, yeah,
Marty
sorry.
here.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Lisa G. Brown, and I live in American Addition, a small area. Everyone knows it, most of everyone. And this area has been around more than 100 years. We've been left behind more than 60 years. There's always been single homes in this area, My neighbors who have purchased homes from Homeport were comfortable until they found out that there were going to be doubles built in our area. They said had they known prior, they would not have purchased homes from Homeport in the American Edition. My neighbors said they're against it, they don't want it, and we need the developers to build single-family homes in American Edition. I heard the early fella say he was a small developer. We need single homes. Make a small home, but single homes. That's it.
Thank you. I don't know if, Assistant Director Wheeler, if you want to, this phase one does not touch American, or I think it's nearby, but.
That's correct. I think Cleveland Avenue is the closest corridor to American Edition, but it doesn't cover American Edition.
And Deputy Director, I don't know if you wanted to speak to, when we talk about increase in density versus single family versus say a duplex, sort of how that sort of translates out in the community.
Yeah, and I think as we look at lots of different types of housing, looking at responding to existing neighborhoods, understanding what that, where those neighborhoods are and making sure that there's opportunities for that diversity where it's appropriate. And I think as we think about housing, you know, the example I perpetually use is my mom lives in a single family home it's in a 1960s subdivision. That's where we were raised. And every house was just like hers, right? And so when she got to the point of we all left the house 25 years ago, she looked around and she didn't have a place to downsize, right? There wasn't an opportunity except for leaving her community and leaving her friends. And so she stayed. And now she's in a house that doesn't work very well for her. And so I think as we looked at her community, thinking about where there could have been options either through smaller format homes, just different options that she could have explored as we aged out of the house and she looked at some different options. But because every house looked exactly like hers, those options were pretty limited. Yeah. And again, I think those are just the opportunities that, you know, we'll have in a future phase, but those are always ways to look at how we can add that aging in place through our communities as well.
Thank you. Yeah. The next speaker to come for council is Ms. Azra Williams. She's there? Ms. Williams, good to see you again. Welcome back to council. And our last speaker after Ms. Williams will be Yvette Carlson. Excellent. Thank you for sticking it out. I appreciate it.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Asmara Williams. I'm also on the North Central Area Commission, as well as an American Edition resident. So I have a couple things, feedback. One of the things particularly is with us in affordable housing, we have to really make sure that the homes are truly going to be affordable, because where we sit now with affordability is based on the county area median income, which is over $95,000. In the city, for Columbus proper, the area median income is under $50,000. So that's where the discrepancy lies. If we're really going to talk about true affordability, let it not be based off of the county and what the city area median income is. If we're going to do 30%, if the income is $50,000, do 30% of that so that people can truly afford to live in these homes. And then also another take back that I'm finding with a lot of the zoning that's coming through, it's kind of disturbing because particularly with a lot of the lots that are being asked for variances, they're like 36-foot lots, and we request for a single family home to be on a 50-foot lot. They're in turn now asking for duplexes that is on a lot that is not even proper for a single family home. So the people are already going to be on top of each other. And then with the affordability rates, the range that it spans, it exceeds the price of a lot of the mortgages in American Edition. So we have a lot of developers that have now come that want to do duplexes on single family lots, and then their rent is more than double some of the mortgages of new build homes that were provided through Homeport. Homeport has pretty much built up our subdivision or community, and our old area is zoned for single family homes. And now the duplexes or new builds that are being proposed for the community are exceeding the rent, or the mortgages by double. $1,300, I mean, they're not even committing to $1,300 rent. They're saying it's whatever the affordability tables are. So one of my asks would be, if they're getting this bonus or getting an abatement for property taxes, that they are committed to being that lower range that you're providing for 30% area median income. Also, sorry, and this is a little over the place because it's just so many things in a minimum amount of time, but with American Addition particularly, Mayor Coleman had a commitment to our community, dedicated to our community to, one, make sure that we get the proper infrastructure because that community as a whole has been neglected for so many decades. And we want to keep it a community. That we need housing. I mean, people are coming to Columbus every day, but if it's the affordable properties that are coming, it's not affordable for the current residents. We're building for all the people that's coming, but people that live here, people that make $15 an hour can't find housing. We have government city employees who cannot afford to live, that are still living at home. A lot of folks have got their kids, grandkids, other relatives living at home because they cannot afford to live. And based off of these affordability tables, they still won't be able to live. So if we're gonna be giving out these abatements or funding, we need to ensure, like, let's say maybe 20% of the building is affordable. We're giving these 2 bonus floors when they're the high structures, then for those 2 floors, they need to be affordable, enough units for people to affordably live. And then also, I want just to take away from what I've seen from going to not just North Central's zoning meetings, going to other communities, a lot of people that have come through the emerging developer program, the lots they're trying to build on aren't properly zoned, and then you're trying to squeeze more on a lot, like particularly right here on Argyle Park, that lot, by Palasko Light, they wanted to put a duplex on the corner and it's just not enough space. So we want more homes, but we want quality homes. And then another just takeaway particularly for this presentation, the city has a print shop. We should have this information accessible at every public library in the city. We can print it out and it's accessible to the public. School's about to let out, but if we were kind of ahead of it, even have the information in the school, so when parents are dropping their kids off to school, they can see it. If we can get a commitment maybe of not even taking a vote or this being adopted to law until maybe we have 20% of the population comment on it, we need to have the community truly engaged and have a true representation of what the city thinks in regards to the zoning code. So if we're only getting 5% turnout or 10% turnout of the population, it's really not the masses' choice. It's only, and granted, we do need to show up, but we truly need a good representation of what the residents think. And I think a 20% amount would help signify that.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. I love the idea about the library. I think that's something that we're going to take away and see how we can engage, because we do know that's a forward-facing place for a lot of families in Columbus. I did want to pause and see if Ms. Prosser could speak towards, so again, there's a number of affordability bonuses that are built into this plan. If you could speak to how that relates to sort of the census tract that those would be located in. So when we talk about the different levels of affordability that exist with our current policy, how that sort of interplays with how that's placed within the zoning code. So, you know, there are certain areas that are going to have different affordability requirements because of the different areas of the city that they're in, and that is going to translate into sort of differences as it relates to allowing folks to have more floors potentially based upon what's being asked of them.
And I think that's one of the opportunities with looking at how the zoning code interfaces with that residential tax incentive. In 2018, the administration and council went through a process to understand how to respond to the different market conditions, and they created 3 different designations that are based on a number of factors from each census tract. So really, controlled in a way that's really specific to each community. Census tracts are pretty small. And allowing the affordability requirements to correspond to those census tracts and what's happening in each of those marketplaces. And so as we think about what we call market ready, where you have a lot of probably market rate units that are going in, that's where you're gonna have your highest requirement for affordability. That will follow through with the zoning height bonus as well. And then as you move your way down, you're at ready for revitalization, which is also going to capture that higher amount of affordability. And then our third category is ready for opportunity. And so we really want to respond to those market conditions. And as we look at some updates that HUD is making around those area median incomes and responding to the concern you're voicing, that it really doesn't make sense to look at MSAs and county-wide, that they're really looking at how do they make a smaller slice so that it is more responsive to communities and what's happening in each of those neighborhoods. So we're watching and we'll be ready for that, hopefully, update from HUD. And then we've calibrated our own policies to respond at the census tract level.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. Right now, we have a very blunt instrument as it relates to how AMIs are set. And what HUD is considering is making that far more reflective, potentially, of Columbus and different areas of Columbus, which, again, would then layer on top of how the affordability would relate to the bonuses that exist potentially within what's proposed right now. So it can get in the weeds very quickly. And again, we sort of need to rely upon the federal government to make some changes. And if you think city council is slow, allow me to introduce to the federal government. But those are, I think, very mindful things that I think you've articulated.
Yeah, and you mentioned the census tracker. You're talking about the 2020 census that was done? Is that the data that you're using, or?
So we would look at, right now you've got 2022 ACS data that's coming through on the census tracts.
Okay, because as fast as Columbus growing, that information really isn't accurate. I mean, the data is 2 years old, and if we're getting 40 people approximately a day, that information is really outdated. So therefore, are we planning for the future, even like with infrastructure, like American Edition has been waiting for infrastructure 30 plus years. We're finally getting it, but yet, I'm being gracious, but the infrastructure that we're getting put in now, as we're getting more and more residents, and Homeport is now going to build more single family homes within our community. Now about the water lines, all that stuff that's now getting put in is not really ready for what is now coming. So we're still going to be behind the 8 ball with our infrastructure, our water, things of that nature. And that's just a major concern of mine.
Yeah, I think that's a general concern for any growing city, and I don't have a perfect answer for it, but we know that especially areas of the city that are growing, I mean, we have areas right now of Columbus that can't grow because their water and sewer capacity can't handle it, right? But I mean, that is a central focus of folks across every department, whether or not we're talking about Department of Public Utilities, Department of Public Service. We need to have the infrastructure investments match the need, but also the future need. And that is certainly something that I think, while not specific to this initiative, it's sort of layered next to.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And our last speaker this evening, thank you again for sticking it out.
Look, I'll be quick. My name is Yvette Caslin. I also reside in the American Edition neighborhood. These were some of my neighbors. I appreciate you allowing us to come speak. Just a quick thing, it was more so to touch on what they talked about. We have the developer. Matter of fact, he was speaking, and I'm gonna call him out. TPT Development that was here earlier that spoke is the main guy that wants to purchase a couple lots, 3 in particular, and put duplexes on there. Our neighborhood is mainly affordable housing, single-family homes through Homeport, and a couple others. There's some Habitat homes and things of that nature, and I do appreciate everything that you all are doing with the new build apartments and things like that on the corridor, but I also want to take into consideration the single family homes, affordable homes, because some people do want to transition from being a renter to a single family home, and we all know that a single family home is very expensive right now. So we were blessed to be able to purchase our homes in our neighborhood that was affordable, and I feel like the American Edition neighborhood could be a stepping stone to transition from the apartment to a single family home that is affordable, because that's what our neighborhood is. So we are not opposed to affordable housing, but I definitely feel the particular type of housing in certain residential neighborhoods do matter. And we bring that to you all. It's not a part of the corridor, but we know that you all make the rules for the variances, and I feel that When the neighborhood comes together and say, hey, we have all these neighbors that really would prefer affordable single-family homes opposed to duplexes or opposed to a 3-unit or a 4-unit apartment, I think that matters. We definitely want to keep the look of our established neighborhoods the same, and we do have a lot of open land, open lots, as some people mentioned, to build more of these stacked apartments that we have. I do like the options and examples that you all have. I'm not a big fan of the urban core because I think 12-story apartment might be a bit much, but the other 3, 4, 5-story apartments, I approve of those, so that's nice. But please take that into consideration for the American Edition. We would love to just keep it single-family homes, affordable single-family homes, because we really don't have that option. We're all trying to, get housing because we definitely need it. So that's all I have to say. Thank you, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. I think those are both conversations for potential phase 2 of zone in, but also our day-to-day zoning work that our area commissions work on, and also that come through city council every single week at 6:30. So with that, that is our final public speaker to come before council. I want to thank the residents that came out tonight that spent, we are on over 2.5 hours of this hearing. Four and a half. Wow, I skipped out on that. 4.5 hours. So when this council says that we are interested in hearing from the public, we mean that. We've been here for 4+ hours on a Tuesday night out in the community. This is the first of 3 hearings that we'll be doing. Again, if you have an idea on a way for this council to engage with more residents to educate folks on what has been proposed, please let us know. We want to be everywhere we possibly can to allow folks to understand what has been proposed before council. Want to thank all the staff that helped to put together tonight's hearing, certainly from the administration for spending their time answering questions from members of the public, CTV that set up to make this hearing happen, all of our council staff that, again, allowed to make this thing work. The materials that folks were provided on the way in can also be shared electronically. If folks want to contact my office, if you're looking for more information about specifically the zone initiative, we had a number of questions tonight about what has been proposed in your neighborhood, specifically how to gain access to that. That is on the Zone In Initiative website, which is columbus.gov/zoning update. Again, you can zoom all the way down into individual parcels to find out, again, how this initiative will affect your neighborhood or potentially how it won't. There is as the council president mentioned a bit ago, there's a number of different events that are happening at the zoning gallery that's downtown, again, with free parking on a bus line, so hopefully accessible to folks. We'll be continuing to announce those events during this 60-day review period. The goal is to bring legislation to council for a vote later this summer. Again, we will have 2 additional public hearings on this topic. The next will be focused on housing and parking, additional transit options, and then the final hearing, we will be providing an evaluation of the public feedback that has been provided at these hearings, but also through the public comment website to determine whether or not council will make any changes to what has been proposed. Folks know the easiest way to get a hold of me typically is email. You can email me at radorans@columbus.gov. And with that, I want to pause and see if any of my colleagues have any closing comments or whether they want to get home to their families after 4+ hours. All right, then. Well, again, with that, this hearing is adjourned. Have a great evening, everyone.